genius lay precisely
my
in his ability to master detail by fashioning broad vision and strategy. He'll memorize the details of 1,600 miles of railroad track. One time he gets a letter that complains about the draining in a ditch that runs along a part of the track from a farm. He'll remember that ditch, said the farmer was right to complain, and immediately dispatched his employees to fix it.
There it is. I'm too late.
His company's own product over and over and over again. He becomes his best critic, and he sees exactly what needs to be fixed. And so he's just riding the rail back and forth, back and forth. And there's only one other thing that he would be doing when he's not noticing defects that he needed to improve. He was reading. It says his rail car, the one that he was, his personal rail car that he was traveling, it was Spartan. There's almost nothing in it, and it was Spartan in every aspect except one. It was loaded with dross. And so this next sentence is a great description of Hill and will not come as a surprise to you. It says, this same intensity and drive made him a very difficult man to work for and with. As his responsibilities mounted, so did his persona as a demanding, raging autocrat. While riding one of his trains that was exceeding the posted speed limit, he went up and queried the engineer about it. When the poor engineer did not recognize his boss and casually admitted to transgression, Hill fired him. Hill was
max in on this one.
Anger or cross. And so he was asked, how do you build a railroad? And
good
the answer
though,
was
right
work,
now.
hard work, intelligent work, and then
Just go and do it.
Work. He was doing this to be the very best. Another smart thing that he would do
code going
is that he would reinvest profits back into infrastructure improvements. So he's constantly wanting to improve the engineering of his railroad, and he was constantly trying to eliminate curves and decrease grades. And so his bias would be to using the best technology of the day if that technology of the day would help him become more efficient, eliminate curves, and decrease grades. And this constant attention to
get this all fired up in all my machines, get them going.
Tons of freight. Remember, everything is going to serve
to be done.
This simple to remember organizing principle that he's keeping everybody in line with. That what we want is the best possible line, shortest distance, lowest grade, and least curvature that we can build. And he does that because he knows that's the best defense. This is a highly competitive industry. Almost all of his competitors have more money than he does, and yet he whips them. So he says they manage the finances of the railroad in a highly conservative and prudent manner. They were not reckless speculators, but were in the business for the long run. Unlike Jay Gould or Henry Villard, Jim Hill took the opposite tack through speculative practices, such as milking a railroad of its land grants and its resources, and then dumping the stock to a gullible public. Instead, he advocated and practiced a policy of plowing large percentages of profits directly back into the property, knowing that the best defense against invading railroads was a better built system that could operate at lower rates. That is one of the things that Hill had in common with Rockefeller. He could make a profit rate so low that the same rates would put his competitors out of business. The best defense against invading railroads was a better built system that can operate at lower rates. Hill worked incessantly at improving every aspect of the railroad structure and operation. He traveled back and forth along the line, looking for dips and bumps and spying out curves that could be straightened and grades that could be lessened. More than any other railroad leader of the day,
nobody steals my keys. I don't think anybody will, right?
And grades, knowing that these were the keys to the lower rates that would vanquish any competition. That part, to me, really speaks to Hill as a craftsman. It's excellent.
I'm actually sharing my screen.
Professional pride of doing your absolute best, of learning everything you can, and then doing whatever you're focused on, doing it as well as you can.
My Mac Mini is sinking.
Another advantage because he's able to think years into the future, where most of his competitors can barely see beyond.
All right, let's get this one going.
And one of the things that he invested in over the long term is that he knew that the success of his line depended on attracting settlers to the region that is served by his railroad. This is vast swaths of uninhabited territory, and he had a great way to describe why this was so important. He said even a railway built to the Garden of Eden would fail if it only had Adam and Eve to serve. So he had a lot of unique marketing ideas too on ways to attract settlers to the region. So he winds up sending out over 100,000 pamphlets and flyers advertising open settlements and the fact that they had all this land available for cheap that you can move your entire family to, that you can own, that you can develop. And so you have advertising brochures on land that was served by his railroad. He spreads that all into America, but he also does it for Europe. He recruited farmers from Europe to immigrate to the United States. He had a bias for Northern Europeans. He thought that he specifically targeted Northern Europeans to try to get them to come to the United States because he thought they were the most talented and productive. And to give you an idea of this and the extreme personality that we're dealing with, he has a great quote where he says, "Give me Swedes," so people from Sweden, "give me Swedes, snuff, and whiskey, and I'll build you a railroad to hell." He was fine recruiting settlers one by one, but he thought it was smarter to recruit an entire village, and in some cases he would target an entire church. He would convince entire congregations of churches to move and develop the land that is serviced by his railroad. And this is a great description of why he thought this was so important. One of James J. Hill's favorite themes that he voiced repeatedly over the years stressed the community of interest, the mutual interdependence between the railroads and the regions they serve. The two must be rich or poor together, he said. And any regional carrier, even one with a de facto monopoly, would only harm itself if it gouged its customers with excessive rates. In fact, later on, he is going to be put under political pressure for his monopoly, and he will continue to make the case that the result of his monopoly
I'm gonna be able to
is
see
the fact
myself.
that it helps him push the prices down, not
Excuse
up.
me.
And Hill was such an important figure in this time of American business history that he pops up in all kinds of books. So there's this book I read a long time ago called The Hour of Fate.
Oh, it's gonna work.
It talks about the war and temporary partnership between Teddy Roosevelt and J.P. Morgan. And Teddy Roosevelt is the one that's pressuring to break up these monopolies and these trusts.
That's good enough.
And to give you an idea of how extreme a personality that Hill was, it says Hill threatened the president and the attorney general that if they do fight, they will have their hands full, and they will wish they had never been born before they get through with me. So definitely an extreme person if you're willing to say that to the president and attorney general. Let's get back to his point. His point is that his product is going to connect people and lands, and that this connection is going to promote economic growth and really develop and create population centers. So long term, this is a good strategy to have this mutual interdependence to make sure that they thrive and they develop the land as much as possible. Because the more they develop the land, the more these immigrants develop the land, the more people and goods are going to travel on Hill's Road. And so here's another quote from Hill about this. He says, "We consider ourselves and the people along our line as partners in the prosperity of the country we both occupy. If the farmer," because many of the immigrants into the land where Hill attract the farmers. So he says, "if the farmer is not prosperous, we are poor. And I know what it's like to be poor." And that policy of aligning incentives was a long-term policy. It's something he was able to build and compound for decades. His competitors, again, could not do this. Let's go back to the Northern Pacific and Henry Villard. Villard's frantic transcontinental building had left the NP, the Northern Pacific, severely overextended and in need of rebuilding much of its hastily constructed main line. The NP, unlike the Great Northern Railway, had alternating management, so there's constantly different people running the company, which Hill continued to despise as a crew of mindless
That means I won't be able to use this computer
unable to hold
because I don't have
policy. That is a massive
a
advantage.
USB-A to USB-C adapter. I've only got one.
Now let's get a description of Hill's. Hill held the advantage of a wonderfully productive and well-built
dongle.
road, one that was slowly and carefully constructed. It's just really hard to compete with a well-run company because many times they can make money at rates a poorly run company cannot. We see that's the case. Hill proved able to blunt their thrust, the competitor's thrust, by the simple way of forcing rates below what the opposition could bear, bolstered by his own well-built road, which could haul high tons of freight more cheaply. And it's clear that things should be done the way that Hill did, because there's other benefits that he enjoys later on. So the book, The Hour of Fate, that I mentioned earlier, they describe the advantage that James J. Hill had over all the other railroad people that were forced into bankruptcy, because so many of the lines were bankrupt and had to be reorganized. And J.P. Morgan was the main person who was actually doing this, and he was doing it so often that they didn't call it railroad reorganization, they called it Morganization. And the book makes the point that James J. Hill is the only one who made that fate. And it's because of this slow, deliberate way, building for the long term, watching his costs, just being obsessed about increasing efficiency, removing defect. The book says,
need to do that, did I?
With deliberate thrift and brutal efficiency.
No, I didn't.
His railroad would become among the most profitable in the Northwest. He did not need J.P. Morgan the way other railroad executives did. And this is the note I left myself many years ago when I read The Hour of Fate, is that financial strength was kryptonite to J.P. Morgan. And one of the most impressive things about James J. Hill is the fact that he's in this industry for 37 years. The industry's constantly changing. and he's able to change it.
Damn.
In fact, he usually sees the trends because he knows the business better than almost anybody else. He sees the trends changing and happening before anybody else does. So he's one of, at the time, he's built up this fabulous independent regional railroad. But he's one of the first people to understand that the days of being able to have an independent regional railroad was going to come to an end. That to survive, he had to continue to extend and actually build a transcontinental system. The regional railroads were going to be swallowed up by the bigger players. He sees this as inevitable, and he's like, okay, this is the time. Right now is the right time to get ahead of this. It's the right time to build, and he thought it would work because at the time, the United States had entered into this long period of inflation, and interest rates were really low. And so as a result, Hill saw this, oh, this may be the time in which I can build this for the lowest cost possible. And he's going to need every advantage that he can muster because he's going to have to build through the Rocky Mountains. And so the opposite of a low grade would be building over mountains. And so he does what he always does. He reads everything. So he gets this set of maps called the Pacific Survey. It is a 12-volume set. In the entire 12-volume set, he finds one brief mention of a possible route that would give you a low passage through the Rocky Mountains. And so Hill hires the best engineer he can find, this guy named John F. Stevens. John F. Stevens is going to be the engineer that is going to build the Great Northern Railway through the Rockies. About 15 years later, Stevens will also be the chief engineer on building
a lot of shit. I don't know what it is.
And I think this brief paragraph illustrates just how remote, dangerous, and difficult this job is going to be, and then how talented Stevens is. So it says they're walking on snowshoes that they had just made. Stevens and his companion climbed to the headwater in deep snow on the night of December 11th. When the thoroughly frightened Indian guide refused to go farther, Stevens left him behind by a fire and went on alone towards the towering peaks. Suddenly, Stevens realized that he was astride an especially advantageous pass. Unable to build a fire, he stomped around through the night in minus 40-degree cold, both to stay alive and to be sure that the western end of the passage really did lay across the divide. Stephen talked about this later. The reason he had to keep walking, because if he stopped...
Alright, we'll just delete it. Fuck it.
This decision to build all the way to the Pacific is going to lead to the hardest work of Hill's life. It is just struggle after struggle after struggle. This paragraph just describes some of the problems he had to solve. Trying to manage a railroad while building it west, Hill worked night and day, agonizing over expenses and the slow pace of construction. Workers in these remote mountains proved hard to get and to keep. They often had to labor on steep slopes with hand tools and to move dirt in hand carts in terrain where horses proved difficult to use. The pace of building
weird, so much bullshit.
And Hill fretted as he saw his hope of completion fading away. And yet, even in the most difficult time of his life, you see one of his traits that's most pronounced throughout his life is that he admires true excellence, true talent. I think a part of human nature is that competency is always respected. So keep in mind, his manager on the site is the civil engineer John S. Stevens. Okay, Stevens sends a report to Hill and he says, "Hey, we have to do a 13-degree curve." And Hill looked at the report. He's like, "This is ridiculous." Remember, he always wants the straightest route possible. So he tells Stevens, "Hey, stop all construction until I get out there." And so Hill travels out to this remote part. He realizes, once he gets there, that Stevens did not obey his orders, and he kept construction going. So Hill then tells Stevens, "Show me this curve." Stevens shows it to him. And Hill realizes that Stevens was right. It had to be a 13-degree curve. There was no other option. Hill also realized that Stevens was right to defy his direct order to stop construction. And so Hill immediately raises Stevens' salary by 50%. Stevens was the one that made it possible for James J. Hill to reach the goal he had.
Update that landing page too.
To get it all the way to the Pacific. And once he reached the Pacific, he didn't stop there. There's a great description of the way Hill thought about this. I think it's a great idea to think of your business as a living organism, something that's always adapting and improving. And said to Hill, the railroad trunk lines and their spreading branches formed a living, vital organism which constantly needed to be replenished. Hill's life passion lay in straightening curves, lowering grades, laying high-grade steel rails, raising tonnages hauled by ever larger cars and engines, and lowering rates and extending over ever longer distances. He cared most about freight, never rails.
We're gonna get this fucking shit out. I'm tired of this. We're gonna do, this is...
The day he is free of IKEA Life for him will no longer
Scrape
be worth
X,
living.
or
He
what do we call it,
loves it,
scrape food.
always wants to lie as close as possible to it, and never tires of improving it. James J. Hill never stops improving his railroad and works on it until he dies. And I think this is the perfect place to close. Like most other robber barons and captains of industry, and like dynamic individuals of any generation, James J. Hill
Open a new window.
His positive traits were quite remarkable. A quick intelligence, and a power of analysis, an incredible power of will and personality, and an unparalleled work ethic and commitment. His negative attributes were mirror images of the positive: an extreme temper that sometimes exploded into rage, a willfulness that could turn into outright ruthlessness, a cold manipulativeness that he used on adversaries, and such a preoccupation with the purpose at hand that he sometimes lost sight of the broader perspective. What does one conclude in the final analysis about this remarkable man? Surely the Northwest will never again witness an individual with such sweeping power, simply because the unique opportunity provided by an opening frontier in a transportation monopoly will never again appear. It is entirely appropriate that the passenger train from Chicago to Seattle is called the Empire Boat in his memory, for his hand reached every aspect of building the regional economy and social order, from transportation to agriculture, mining, lumbering, maritime trade, and town and city building.
Take it all.
His larger-than-life stature is well attested by the persistence, nearly 80 years after his death, of his memory and legend. The life of James
Probably
J.
still
Hill
trying to
certainly demonstrates
smooth
the
this over.
impact one willful individual
Text
can have
clipping?
on
What the
course of
fuck?
history. As Hill said, "I've made my mark on the surface of the earth, and I can't wipe it out." And that is where I'll leave it. For the full story, highly recommend reading the book. I will leave a link down below in the show notes and available at founderspodcast.com. If you buy the book using that link, you'll be supporting the podcast at the same time. That is 371 books down, 1,000 to go, and I'll talk to you again soon.
So, let's do... What we got? That's frustrating. This computer's not a piece of shit. Go ahead. Go bye-bye. This is crazy. I'm already hitting my limit. It's like insane. It just keeps taking money. Now it's giving me some back, but let's see. Oh fuck. Every time. This guy. No. Screenvex. I'm actually going to try this. I don't need to have the files. Get rid of this bad boy. What's going on with this? God, I hate these fucking loading skeletons. They look like shit. Grab a time. Turn off sharing for a second. I can't let you guys see this shit. Too many keys. Dude, oh shit. Come on, get out of here. I'm just gonna turn this off for a second. This is freaking terrible, man. Zoom out. Stop it. There we go. Don't give you that one. I guess I could. Do that one. There you go. Have fun with that, guys, for a second. I do this. Oh, I can do that. Cool. Multiple little windows. Do it. Come on. Uh, 208. I can't read this shit at all. 581. 208. 581. 3695. Give me an Appy token. Or give me an Appy token. I'm not gonna like completely. I think I can not completely share this. This is possible. Do a make this a little skiddier. Do it. I'll try that. Shit, is it? Okay. This is honesty. Excuse me. Where's go through? You might see it. There it is. USB 3. Must be real quick. Oh, really? There we go. About an hour. Nice. 145. It's gonna go down, huh? Good. I want to build. gonna do. Why are you gonna do that? No, stop it. What's it called? TikTok. OnlyFans. Icky. Terrible. Can't even do it. Terrible. Let's see what happens. Damn it, I wanted it to be not like that. Alright. Shit. Where do I? Let's check out Toddler Jam Room Manager. What's the problems we got? Why does this? It doesn't have any kind of drift on this. Maybe I have to go to the apps. Shit. Okay, this is one. No. What we got? Excuse me. The worst scratchy throat. It's terrible. Oh, God. I'm gonna share everything with you guys. An open book. Share it. What do you guys think? Whoop. Nope. No. Not today. No.
Power off.
Turn back on.
Power on. Bluetooth.
Here's the
pairing.
pricing. Very competitive.
Bluetooth connected.
All the same features as Calendly Pro. You get that for free. Bam. Pro's still cheaper than Calendly. I'll have to get rid of this fake shit, but alright, dashboard. So what we got? Pushing that up way too much. I don't like it. Do we'll do what just happened? Yeah, that was vibe coded. My Apple calendar hooked up, but it's not picking up my events. Let me just see if I could actually do something like that. We're gonna do a. I should have these. I mean, that's actually my Chatterworks. I bet all this is my Chatterworks. So yeah, there's not one orange. Do bam, good enough for now. I think I put this as a time blocked. fuck. That was terrible. There it is. Oh shit. Oh. It's gotta go. My good. It's like the same shit, some of it. I got this because windsurf just goes fucking crazy. It takes up all my swap space after it takes up all my memory. I'm done with windsurf. We got now. Empty in the trash, that's right. I'm a disk utility. This is what I want to build to now. Into Mac Rabbit is this guy. If that domain's available. Mac Wabbit? Should I call it? That would hurt people's feelings. Could be good. Whoa. Okay. We are gonna do a little bit of, put that over there. What is doing that? Oh, this thing. I didn't say it. Scrapex? We're doing Scrapex here. Someone wants to do it. You run it, motherfucker. Come on. Got time for this shit? Which one is this? Fairly update? 4 of them? I'm not sure, but I need to like not. I'm gonna have to like, it's killing my computer. I gotta get V. Nexus is just too much, even for M4 Pro Max or whatever it is. This is my new one though. Open. It doesn't get the fucking shit. It's crazy. Excuse my language. something. Oof. Fancies. Those are fancy guys right there. Joints. We're going to do... this one.
He explains, if you read between the lines, how to get the incentives right. And so he's writing this memo to all the managers. If a bright, young, ambitious man joins our company and wants to make our company his career, does he do it because he likes his manager? Do you think that this man is going to work 10 hours per day just to help you build your store? Do you think that this man is going to work for low pay year after year just so that you could build your profit share contract into a nice, fat nest egg? No, I don't think so. He wants to see results just like you did when you started up the ladder. This man didn't join the company because of the future of the store manager. He understands that you need to appeal to interest, not to reason, right? They were all inherently self-interested. He just gets it. This man didn't join the company because of the future of the store manager, or for that matter, the future of Les Schwab personally. This man joined the company because of his future. And so what he's talking about is trying to get more of the store managers. He wanted to promote from within all the time. In fact, one of his main directives to his companies, and one of, I think, the main ideas he used to build such a successful company was promoting from within. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Sam Zamuri, the Banana King, that said, "There's no problem you can't solve if you know your business from A to Z." So actually, I'm going to pause where I'm at in this sentence and read something that Les says later on. In our 34 years of business, we have never hired a manager from the outside, nor have we ever hired an assistant manager directly to do that job. Every single one of our more than 250 managers and assistant managers started at the bottom changing tires. They have all earned their management jobs by working up, and they also understand every single part of the business because they did every single part of the business. Another way he reminds me of Sam Walton. Sam Walton had this great line in his autobiography when people ask like how he built Walmart. He says, "We just got after it, and then we stayed after it." Les Schwab would say that once you get on the ball, he uses that word all the time, like you got to be on the ball, that you stay on the ball. And so a directive that he gives to all of his employees, that's reprinted in the book, is the fact that you have to focus and you have to avoid complacency. If we think there's a free lunch, if we rely on last year's results, then this company will turn a corner. And then we too will start to go downhill. And once you start down, it is mighty hard to turn around. If we become complacent, then brother, it's all over with. And one thing that he repeats throughout the book that I really love is the fact that if you do stay on the ball, you'd be shocked at how bad and how, especially like most businesses are poorly run. And then if you're on the ball,
cool. I hope this works.
So he's realizing this because he's dealing with all these monopolistic rubber companies. And so he says, as a young person, I always thought the heads of large corporations must be human calculators. As I got deeper into the tire business and met many of these people, I was surprised. So often, all they knew was the policy of the company. Ask them a question, and the policy would flow from their mouth in a stream, but they couldn't think on their own. The good people who could think and had guts had dropped out of the company long ago and went out on their own. I've often said that we should send Goodyear, Firestone, and the other large rubber companies a Christmas card each year and thank them for their policies, as their policies made it possible for us to be successful. Saying your mediocrity is my opportunity. And so he was looking for, remember, he starts out from day one. It's like, I have to fix my supplier problem. This is a big problem. That leads to one of his greatest ideas. And he's had this idea where it's like, well, at this time, tire dealers
got several apps going on this computer now too. So.
Right? And he's like, well, how does a supermarket buy groceries? There's no such thing as a Kellogg supermarket. They may carry Kellogg products if it's expensive for the customers, if they get good prices, if they get a good relationship with their supplier. But once they don't, they just move it out.
What do you think of the icon?
And they actually substitute it for something else. He's like, I'm going to do the same thing for tires. I was so disgusted with the tire suppliers I was willing to do almost anything to help my company survive. In 1966, I made a big decision. I decided to go straight independent, to buy tires like Safeway buys groceries, to buy the best possible tire, good quality, and at the lowest possible price. This was a major move at that time, and no one had tried it before. The idea was to be a supermarket tire store. In no way were we identified or affiliated with any individual rubber company. Let's go back to the fact that incentives drive
I've been
behavior.
working
One
all
benefit,
day.
one unexpected
Didn't
benefit
stop.
of sharing profits with employees, less theft from within.
Go to bed,
Again, never
wake
ever
up.
think about something else when you should be thinking about the power of incentives. He's talking about the fact that they will expand. I think at this point they have 163 stores, and people would analyze this company like, where are all your controls? And he's like, well, we don't have many controls. Why? Because the incentives are controlling behavior. We didn't have many controls. The thing that held it together was that we ran each store as a separate entity. As long as we made sure that every tire was billed to them, as long as they made sure that every tire they sold was billed to the customer, we would come out all right. As long as the people were honest. Our contracts with the manager said, another shrewd system here, okay? Our contracts with the manager said that in case of dishonesty, you forfeit all your money in the contract. And so this would accumulate through the year. After they had about 20,000 or so in their contract, it helped everyone be honest.
Finder going crazy.
Now we share with all the people in the store. Now this is so important. He's really describing. Again, he just fundamentally understands human nature. If any one employee sees another employee steal anything, then they are a weak kitten if they don't report it. Why? Because this man is stealing from them, from his children. If he won't fight for his children, he can't be very much. For a company as large as ours is today, we have very little dishonesty. Every few pages he goes back and tells more stories about, he feels the profit sharing he did is the most important thing he did in his entire career. And he can't, multiple times in the book, he's like, I don't understand why other companies are copying this.
All right, what we got?
And so he calls it being unselfish for good reasons. I think is a
I
good
didn't
way to
even
think
allow
about it.
this.
My thinking has always been, if I give away half the profits, I still have half. If I share $10 million with people, I still have $10 million. I don't understand why businessmen don't do this, as it's being unselfish for good reasons. It helps other people. And he talks about the fact that you're helping other people succeed actually will
Fucking
provide
show
you
it.
a deeper satisfaction if you just had another $10 million. Success in life is being a good husband. It's being a good father. And then you end up being a second father to hundreds of other men and women. Last night I attended a wedding of a young man from our office. This young man told me that two men had influenced his life. His father and me. That is worth more than money. And he's writing these words after he already dealt with the worst thing that a human could go through, which is the death of his son. Les is gonna he's gonna have heart attacks, he's gonna be drinks, he says, by his own, he's like, the doctor says I'm in bad health, what he means is I'm fat. Like, Les talks that way the whole time. But somehow he lives till he's almost 90 if I'm not mistaken, but his daughter's gonna wind up dying of cancer at 52, and his son
Flow screenshot.
is going to die at 31 years old. And so his son works in the business, and he winds up having this
You see,
accident.
this is.
He's trying to fix this truck tire.
Couldn't even
and
fucking tell.
The lock ring was under too much pressure, and the lock ring flies up and hits him in the head. And he's going to be alive for a few more years after this, but he was never really the same. And I'm just going to read part of this to you. His son's name
This
is
has gotta
Carlin.
be it. So.
Carlin stopped by the house
Just
one
not
night,
gonna do
really
that right
broken
now. I'm gonna
down.
run the
Maybe I
console.
was too rough on him, but the only thing I could tell him was, damn it, I told you so. I wonder now if maybe I was too harsh on him. He was defeated, bankrupt, broke, and really down. The job was too much for Harlan. It was too much for Harlan. He was about to break down emotionally, so I had no choice but to take him off the job. It certainly was hard on me. It made him feel he was a failure, and he was drinking entirely too much. Harlan Schwab would have been a tremendous help had he lived a normal life. He had problems though, and in some ways, he would have had to conquer these problems sooner or later. At 2 a.m. on October 26, 1971, my doorbell rang. A policeman was at the door. He came in and told me that Harlan was dead.
Damn.
He had run into the back of a log truck. I sometimes have thoughts that he might have done this on purpose, as he was very pressed. He was 31 years old. Harlan left his wife, Jean, his daughter, Diana, 10 years old, and
his son Alan, 8 years old. Absolutely devastating. And then around this time, he winds up having a falling out with his partners. He had given two of his partners, I think, he
questions.
owns
Come on.
20% of the company, and they go crazy. They fall out. They have a falling out over money, which is crazy because of how small the amounts they are today. Not realizing that you're on this rocket ship, it's working. Just hold on, don't mess this up. Talk it out. There's just something with. They're not technically co-founders of the company.
Fuck, I don't want to run Docker.
Co-founders. I think Paul Graham said the number one breakup in Y Combinator is not like external factors. It's actually co-founder conflict. You just see it a lot in these books. I'm going to read this whole thing to you and explain to you what's going to happen. But when I'm reading it this time, I couldn't help but think about the falling out that Ray Kroc had with the McDonald's brothers. And the falling out over money and disagreement about like the direction of the company. It's just like you're shooting yourself in the foot. There's this giant opportunity. So few businesses actually work and get to this scale, and you ruined it. It's like hard enough to start a company, a successful company, and then one that's succeeding more than 99.99% of all other companies. And yet there's something where we just can't help but shoot ourselves in the foot. Reminds me of this. There's this lyric that 50 Cent talks about that he says, "Enemies stay enemies, but friends they change. People go crazy over money, my man." And so this is exactly what happens here. Norm Nelson and Don Miller, these are his partners, were both making tons of money, but a lot of that money was not being taken out of the company. They leave it in there. Their salary was enough to live on, but the rest stayed in the company and used for expansion. They each owned 20% of this money. But here's what happens. Now they're seeing how much the company's making. Now the money that's in the company that technically they could have access to is growing and growing. So their wives, people in the family is like, hey, you need to push less on this. We need to get the money. They and their family saw all the money they were making, and their wives wanted to get their hands on some of it. And so they wound up having a disagreement about this. And so now Norm and Don wind up teaming against Les. So now it's 2-on-1. But even though Les owns way more of the company, owns 60% to their 20% each, I soon found out that I'd run into a buzzsaw as both Norm and Dom teamed up against me. This is something I never could figure out. This was one terrible mistake on their part, as you can use hindsight today. Money has funny effects on different people, especially the kind of money that these men were now making. I went home and I was talking to my wife about nothing else that night. At breakfast the next day, she suggested, why don't you buy them both out? You'll get by some way. Something hit me. I hit the table. I pounded the table. Dishes fell off, and I said, that's the best damn idea we've had in 6 months, because this has been going on for 6 months. In the 6 months that we've been talking about it. The agreements that I had with Norm and Don said that I could buy them out at book value at any time by giving them 30 days notice. And so he goes and meets his partner. Don, you want a swimming pool? Because they wanted like swimming pool boats and stuff people want when they money. Don, you wanted a swimming pool? Now you can have it. You're gonna get $225,000. Norm, you wanted your money? Now you're gonna get your money. You'll get around $300,000. So
sick.
He wasn't buying out his partners. What's the value of this decision to the fifth generation that winds up selling the company? That's another thing to talk about. I don't want to confuse you too much, but over and over again he talks about, I want my company run this way or take my goddamn name off it. I don't want the company to go public. I don't want to sell the company. And you could do that all you want, but the guy's been dead for a long time. And then, not even for a long time, I think it was 10 years later. And they wind up selling the company. There's just this weird thing that we want, like this legacy to continue on. I've been thinking about this my own self. It's like, well, is it even possible to have like this multi-generational succession plan? Because now they're 5 generations out, and they're like, oh yeah, great-great-grandpa or whatever didn't want to sell the company, but this company's offering us $3 billion. Yeah, we're gonna take it. So, just a thought that's in the back of my mind there. If you're a successful entrepreneur, you're used to having control and influence and bending the world to your will. And yet, all that is not going to exist when you're not here anymore. It's just something to think about. So, anyways, he buys out 20% of the company for $300,000, and then the other 20% $225,000. Okay, just one part of their contract.
This guy, I'll see how it goes.
Salary or anything else. They were eligible for a 5% cash bonus each year. Today, when he says today, it's 1986.
We're gonna do. What we got? I got no ads.
So they just held for another 15 years or so. Instead of taking $300,000 that day or $225,000 that day, they've been making $1 million per year. Now, why did I say that? That was very reminiscent of this disagreement that Ray Kroc had with McDonald brothers. They have this huge fight. It's in the book Grinding It Out, which I've made 2 podcasts on. The last time I made an episode on it was like 293 earlier this year. Ray Kroc winds up buying out the McDonald brothers, and it cost him $14 million and a bunch of interest or whatever, right? And at the time it was a lot of money, but now he's looking back maybe like 2 decades after, and he's like, oh, this is peanuts, because their contract said that they would have stuck around. They would get 0.5% of all sales in every single McDonald's anywhere, now and in the future.
Sick.
And so even though I think Ray Kroc is writing that book. That book is probably written in the 70s. Who knows what it'd be worth today? But if they had just held on, instead of taking, I think it was $12 million to the McDonald's brothers. I think they had to pay like $2 million in transaction costs or interest, something like that. But let's say the McDonald's brothers made $12 million one time. If they just held on, they would be making, at that time that Ray Kroc published book, $15 million in royalties every year. And that's now you're not going to work for that money. You're not going to the office. You're not working in the McDonald's store. It's just $15 million each year. As it grows, $16 million next year.
Just give it to
$5
free
million
anyway for
5
now.
years from now. It just goes on and on and on. So again, people just go crazy. They go nuts. Money has funny effects on different people, and it can cause you to make a terrible financial decision. And now that I'm thinking about it, let me look for it. Something just popped in my mind. I'm going to search my read wise. There is a line. Yep, found it. Okay. This is nuts. Okay, so I just thought about another like investor, founder, partner conflict. Henry Ford. One of his investors invested $10,000. They wind up having this huge falling out. Now think about owning a part of the Ford Motor Company, right? Pre-Model T. Okay, so this guy, I'm just gonna read this. I'm like excited, and I think I've had too much caffeine today. Let me just read this to you. He got $175,000. Hardly a bad this is Henry Ford speaking now, okay? He got $175,000. Hardly a bad return on an investment of $10,000 3 years earlier. So that's great. You invested $10,000. 3 years later, you push this issue to get your money out, and you got $175,000. You did great, right? But if he'd stuck it out for a decade longer, he would have gotten $100 million.
So
that is bananas.
you. I shouldn't say you.
10,000 into 100 million in 13 years, and instead he took the $175,000. Let's go back to his partners. Another thing that he repeats over and over again: life is hard. There's no digital version of this book to search through, but if there was, life is hard is probably the thing that repeats. Life is hard, but again, it turned out to be the best thing that could have ever happened to the company. Greed was entering into the company, and greed destroys. Their interest today would be worth around $12 million each. So again, their equity interest would be worth $12 million in 1985 when the book came out. Their annual bonus would be another $1 million on top of that. Now this is bananas, right? Because at the time when they did this, when they pushed the issue, the company was only doing 10 million sales. I think this was 1967, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, 1969. Sorry. Okay, so 1967, they're doing 10 million. That's great. 1985, they're doing 180 million. In 2018, they did 1.8 billion dollars. They could have still been alive and having 20% of that company, and instead they sold it for their interest for $225,000 so they could buy a swimming pool. Incredible. This is why I love biographies. There's so many lessons, and hopefully that hits you in the head, or hits you in the heart. But that takes place over 3-4 pages. It's absolutely incredible, and then it just makes you think of all the other biographies and maybe other episodes you've listened to. You tie it all together, and it really, I think, makes it resonate much more.
Fuck, it's about to crash.
Now,
Is
another
it?
example.
Oh no, tell me it didn't fuck. Okay.
Sam Walton and Les
I got that save. Christ.
So Sam Walton is autobiography. He says, if you are not serving the customer or supporting the folks who do, we do not need you. This Jew, Les, is constantly railing against office people, even though he's an office person. He's like, the store people are the only ones that are important. We have had over the years some people in the office that sometimes think that they are more important than the stores. The office serves only one purpose, and that is to serve the stores. The office and accounting people can only tell the stores what they have done. If the store manager runs his store right, he doesn't have to spend hours and hours looking at the office report.
fuck's
And if
sake.
he's doing okay, the records will show it. In fact, if he spends too much time in his office reading emails or looking at reports,
Okay.
it is a sure thing that his
Oh, yeah,
store
go back.
will suffer. Sell tires, give service, keep expenses low, watch for leaks. Do these things and you'll come out all right. Our store managers make more than our office people. Some of our office people, especially some with these MBA degrees, sometimes wonder about this. But I've warned them, do not bitch to me because that is the way I want it. If you want to go out, start at the bottom changing tires and work into a manager job, then hop
Sick.
to it. If it weren't for those men in these stores working their butts off in all kinds of weather, missing meals, and working god-awful hours, you wouldn't even have a job. And so that's something that Les repeats. Get out of your goddamn office. Says it over and over again. Like, stop getting in your office, reading reports, go out and help the customers, serve the stores. And then once you're out of your office, you need to stay out of your office and you get to use this line of thinking again. I could help another store manager more in 1 hour than a professional type management person could in a week. Why? Because I had the same problems. He had done the job, right? The professional type management loses out and it doesn't take long. If you stay out of a store for 30 days, you've forgotten 50% of what you should know. And when I read that, I thought of this pianist quote that, let me go find a book. I gotta pick up Poor Charlie's Almanac now. And Charlie uses this idea, or the story, this quick story, to illustrate an idea. He talks about, like, once you have these skills, you constantly use them, or you're gonna lose them. And he says, skills of a very high order can be maintained only with daily practice. This famous pianist once said that if he failed to practice for a single day, he could notice his performance deterioration. And then after a week's gap in practice, the audience could notice it as well. Les Schwab's version of that is if you stay out of a store for 30 days, you've forgotten 50% of what you know. And so then Les tells a story about how he wound up winning this competition with what he thought might be a formidable adversary, like this Nelson Tire Warehouses. And they made a mistake. So he will constantly talk about, hey, you need to have a low-cost structure, you need to watch your costs. Of course he did. But he didn't feel that way about wages. He thought you should pay the highest wages possible. Because the higher wages you pay, the better quality employee you get. The better quality employee you get, the happier customer you be. And so there's all these like second and third order effects that the people that just cut salaries and think about salaries and wages as a part of their costs never realize and it wind up doing it. And so it says if Neil made a major mistake, and he must have because he went bankrupt, it was in moving too fast, but he had been concerned for quite a period of time. They were springing up all over Oregon, and he got up to 24 stores.
Better.
And so he talks about they did really good in advertising, they did good at holding down costs, but the one mistake they did was that they paid low wages. And the flaw here,
Not enough RAM. Whack.
was that they didn't
Can't
get
believe it.
with that low pay near the quality of employees that we had. And this is the most important part. As he's going through and like having this competition head on head, he's like, oh shit, did I make a mistake here? Like, should I be doing what he's doing? And so he says, after thinking about this for a year or so, I'm wondering if I shouldn't cut wages and benefits. I finally made the decision. If I couldn't have good benefits, and if I couldn't have the best employees, then why would I want to stay in business? So we did nothing, and we won. The customer liked us best. Life is hard. This is his summary. This is his summary on the Neil Tire Warehouse and what doomed them. Life is hard for the man who thinks he could take a shortcut. And so this is an interesting historical fact buried in this. Very hard to find, but it's a book
Terrible.
that a lot of people have not read. So, you know KKR? I think it's like Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts and Company. I think they have like $1 trillion under assets under management. It's like one of the biggest investment companies in the world, if I'm not mistaken. Well, this is now what, 40 years ago, he's actually interacting with a bunch of like the partners. And the reason is, I need to bring this up because I mentioned this earlier, how like he could say, hey, it's going to stay in the family business, it's never going to be for sale, but once you die, you really don't have a lot of say in this. And so he talks about over and over again, the company isn't for sale, all the stock will remain in the family. He winds up turning down Buffett earlier in his career. He winds up turning down Michelin Tire. They wanted to buy the company, and turns out KKR tried to buy the company as well. And this would have been shortly after KKR was founded. because KKR was founded in 1976.
Maybe this center
I'm
just
so glad I
so
resisted the
small.
urge to have our stock on the market. I don't want a few investors around the country club asking about our business and questioning some of our decisions. They might even ask, how come some of those store managers make so much money? Why do they make as much as I do and I have a college degree? I'd probably lose a customer, as my answer would be, he is worth twice as much as you, and he has a degree too. He learned how to be a businessman. I'd probably add, he also learned how to work, something you never did learn. There's another company that wanted to buy him, and he wound up meeting with the guy. He takes the calls just for fun. This company was headed by a man in his 70s who had made a fortune by buying up privately held companies and letting the present management run them. How many people have used that idea successfully? Buying up privately held companies and letting the present management run them. I told them that I didn't want to sell. The KKR people also contacted me, and I spent a day with them. I was more curious than anything. Everyone knows about KKR. They have bought companies out for billions. They are nice people, and if I truly wanted to get out, I would consider them, as they have a good reputation with how to handle the companies and employees after they buy it. And so this is causing him to think about like succession plans and what's going to happen.
But it's
and he's
really-
very concerned because he says, I've
It's
seen
still
companies
working on
fail
it.
and go downhill.
No, it's not.
And they and sometimes they disappear entirely after the founder retires or
terrible.
dies. I hope this doesn't happen with our company. Where we are at this point, Les already had way more money he ever needed. He could have retired 15 years ago. I could come out with he's talking about selling the company. I could come out with an astronomical bundle of money if I sold the company. But what would I do with it? What good is money beyond a certain point? I think the biggest misconception about public has about a successful businessman is that he's working for more money. You won't find many truly successful ones that are only working for money. Success in my mind, they obviously like the money. He's not saying that, right? Success in my mind comes from having a successful business. One that is a good place to work, one that offers opportunity for people, and one that you could be proud of to own. And he goes right back into the fact that incentives drive behavior, and he's very proud of what he's done. It is very rewarding to create a program and watch it work. There's something in our program that makes a man that's several hundred miles from the main office be at his store at 7:30
This thing's terrible.
and sometimes have to stay till 9 p.m. if needed. It's not a big, thick policy book. It's not a lot of supervisors, which he doesn't have. It's something that our programs created in him right in his heart. He continues on this, and he feels that most companies put the emphasis on the wrong part. We are different from most
It's
American
like a
corporations.
container
because
that
the
would
most
suck.
important people in the company are people in the firing line, the ones who sell, the ones who do service work and take care of the customer. Most American corporations have the fat salaries and outrageous bonuses for the top people and treat the people at the end of the line as peons. I guess that is why, if you're on the ball, you can beat them on any type of fair, competitive basis. And he practices what he preaches. The warehouse executive people should be very happy that the store managers make good money and make more money than anybody else in the company.
It's
As it helps
really
them, if jealousy ever creeps in, goodbye, let's
It's
walk
relative
company.
loads.
We have great
But
people. This
even
won't
that,
happen
it's
as long
too
as I'm alive.
slow. It's
I'll kill
terrible.
them if it does. Again, fanaticism and scale combined can be very powerful. They'll find out that life is hard, and if life is hard, it caps. It's almost like his motto.
No.
Life is hard. And then he continues on this theme over many, many pages about the importance of taking care of the store. If you take care of the customer, take care of the store, then the office is automatically taken care of. There's this great line. I need to do her biography, Mary Kay, she's the founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics. She has one of the best, in terms of like how to win friends and influence people, if you want to think about it in those terms, she has one of the best lines I've ever heard. She says that Mary Kay said that everyone goes through life with an invisible sign hanging around their neck that says, make me feel special. This can be applied to customers, but it can also be applied to employees. This is what Les says. Most men are starved for personal recognition. Any boss who, unknowingly or otherwise, destroys an employee's self-esteem also destroys the employee. Truly work to make this man
Especially if you
a
got a
successful
killer.
man, and then you have done something great.
You got a killer, you
Great
just
for the man, and
don't
great
even
for
hire
you.
him if you can't let him.
Les believed in
Go
building
free.
up and empowering something he repeats over and over again. Keep your decision making as low as possible.
Right,
Keep
negative
decision-making
balance.
lower.
Oh,
A
that's
company
right.
starts, it grows, and as it grows, more and more of the decision
Show you
making
guys some
tends
numbers.
to move up to the main
Yeah.
office. And this is one hell of a big mistake. The decision making should be always be
Zed,
made
I
at
forgot
the
about
lowest
Zed.
possible level. Give your manager the authority to make his own daily decisions and let him run his show. Keep your decision making at the lowest possible level. And then I want to close on this book before we get to Charlie's analysis of this book. I love what he talks about here. Keep the main thing the main thing. Focus on doing the job to to your best of your ability today that gets you to tomorrow, and then continue that process over a long career, and you'll be surprised where you end up. So he's looking back and talking about if he didn't do the day-to-day things correctly, they would have never got this far. Those companies that have grown large must have had as many of the same problems that we've had. I think many times of the many things that have happened that could have stopped us from growing. If Frank had failed with that store in Redmond, this is when they expanded the second store. If the large commercial account I had that owed me so much money had gone broke at the wrong time. If I hadn't won my fight with the OK franchise. If the foreign tires hadn't been available to us. If I had not been able to get through the period of the blow up between my partners and me. If any of my first 5 or 6 stores had failed. If I hadn't gotten out of ranching and got my mind on my business. And the many, many, many more ways that could have stopped the growth of the Les Schwab company. The parting advice that he has reminds me of one of my favorite Edwin Land quotes. Edwin Land said there's a rule that they don't teach you at Harvard Business School. It is, if anything is worth doing, it's worth doing to excess. The Les Schwab version of that, looking back on his career, says whatever you do, you must do it with gusto. You must do it in volume. It is a case of repeat, repeat, repeat.
There we go.
And so with that, I pick up Poor Charlie's Almanac. I go to talk number 9, and that is where Charlie analyzes the book that you and I just went over. And so he says, now I'll give you a hard problem. There's a tire store chain in the Northwest that has slowly succeeded over 50 years. It's the Les Schwab tire store chain. It just ground ahead. It started competing with the stores that were owned by the big tire companies that made all the tires, like the Goodyears and so forth. And of course, the manufacturer favored their own stores, and those stores had a big cost advantage. Later, Les Schwab rose in competition with the huge price discounters like Costco and Sam's Club. And before that, he competed against Sears. And yet here is Schwab, now with hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. And Schwab is in his 80s with no education, having done the whole thing. How did he do it? So this is where Charlie's going to analyze how he did it. And so he says, let's think about this with some microeconomic fluency. Is there some wave that Schwab could have caught? So if you listened to last week, this is something that Charlie talks about over and over again, is his surfing model. Get at the beginning of something, and it's working, and you're riding the wave, stay on the surfboard. He said, you'd be shocked at how, you just stay on the surfboard, it's going to take you a long way. A lot of people jump off, right, and they get mired in the shallows. That's what Charlie says. And so he says, was there some wave that Schwab could have caught? The minute you ask the question and the answer pops in, the Japanese had a 0 position in tires in America, right? 0. And they got huge. So this guy must have ridden that wave in the early times. But his slow following success has to have other causes. And so this is where he goes into this Lollapalooza result that Les gets. This is something that Charlie was intensely interested in. He would collect a bunch of instances. He would constantly read.
Kind of like easy to get away with it,
though,
Josh. I had this figured out.
This guy did a hell of a lot of things right, and among the things that he did right is he must have harnessed the superpower of incentives. He had a very clever incentive structure driving his people, which again is why Munger said at the annual meeting, you should buy the book. You're managing people, just read it just for his incentive structure. There's a bunch in the book. And he must be pretty good at advertising, which he is. He's an artist. So he had to get a wave in the Japanese tire invasion, and then a talented fanatic had to get a hell of a lot of things right and keep them right with clever systems. Again, it is not that hard of an answer. We hire business school graduates, and they're no better at these problems than you are. Maybe that's the reason we hire so few of them. Well, how did I solve this problem? Obviously, I was using a simple search engine in my mind to go through checklist style. And I was using some rough algorithms that work pretty well in a great many complex systems. And those algorithms run something like this. And so he's saying this applied to Les Schwab, but it also applies to a lot of these other super successful companies. And he gives 4 factors here. He says extreme success is likely to be caused by some combination of the following factors. Number 1, extreme maximization or minimization of 1 or 2 variables. Number 2, adding success factors so that a bigger combination drives success, often in a non-linear fashion, as one is reminded by the concept of breakpoint and the concept of critical mass in physics. Often these results are not linear. You get a little bit more mass and you get a Lollapalooza result. And of course, I've been searching for Lollapalooza results all my life.
There's too many
so
things.
I'm very interested in models that explain their occurrence. And so Charlie's also explaining not just Les Schwab. He uses Costco as an illustration of this point. Toyota as an illustration of this point. Some he mentions many more. Number 3, an extreme of good performance over many factors. That is jumps right out of the book, the Schwab book. And finally, 4, catching and writing some sort of weighting. So that is where I'll leave it. Highly recommend that if you can get a copy, they're very hard to get. Again, limited, there's only 20,000 I think in the entire world. You can get a copy of the book. Highly recommend you do so. It's fascinating. And it doesn't really matter what order you do this in. You can read the Les Schwab book first and then read Charlie's analysis. Because I read this book for the first time 4 years ago, but then I read Poor Charlie's last week. I'm like, oh shit, like I should go back and revisit Les Schwab. And then reading his analysis and then reading the book was really cool. And then going back to his analysis after.
I can't have that.
I think really
I can't have this cursor.
In any case, I will leave the links down below for both those books. And if you buy them using that link, you'll be supporting
Besides this, come on, buddy. You got the book.
That is 330 books down, 1,000 to go, and I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, so what you're about to hear is this question I was asked a few months ago. I actually recorded this a few months ago. They asked, how did History's Greatest Experience think about hiring? And all the answers. People think I have a better memory than I actually do. You know, people say, oh, you have a great memory. My wife would laugh at that. Because I forget things all the time. It's not that I have a good memory, it's I reread things over and over and over again. Every single answer, every single reference you're about to hear in this 20-minute mini episode came from me searching all of my notes and highlights. That option is now available to you. If you like what you hear, if you think it's valuable, if you're already running a successful company and you want an easy way to reference the ideas of history's greatest entrepreneurs in a searchable database that you can go through at your convenience anytime you want, then you go to foundersnotes.com and sign up. I want to start out first with why this is so important. There's actually this book that came out in 1997. It's called In the Company of Giants. I think it's episode 208 of Founders. For MBA students, if I remember correctly, and they're interviewing a bunch of technology company founders. And in there, Steve Jobs is one of them. This is, right, I think even before he came back to Apple. And they were talking about, well, yeah, we know it's important to hire, but in a typical startup, a manager or a founder may not always have time to spend recruiting other people. And I first read this Steve's answer to this, I don't know, 2 years ago, and I never forgot it. I think it's excellent. I think it sets up why this question is so important, and really spend fishing.
It's wasteful.
Basically, all your time doing this. In a typical startup, manager may not always have time to spend recruiting other people. That's Steve. Totally. I think it's the most important job.
Wow.
Assume you're by yourself in a startup and you want a partner. You take a lot of time finding a partner.
About? Steve Jobs.
This is Steve's answer to this. I don't know, 2 years ago, and I never forgot it. It sets up why this question is so important, and really be spending, especially in the early days, basically all your time doing this. In a typical startup, manager may not always have the time to spend recruiting other people. Then Steve jumps in. I disagree totally. I think it's the most important job. Assume you're by yourself in a startup and you want a partner. You take a lot of time finding a partner, right? He would be half of your company. I'm going to pause there. This idea of looking at each new hire as a percentage of the company is genius. Why should you take any less time finding a third or a fourth of your company or a fifth of your company? When you're in a startup, the first 10 people will determine whether the company succeeds or not. Each is 10% of the company. So why wouldn't you take as much time as necessary to find all 8 players? If three out of the 10 were not so great, why would you start a company where 30% of your people are not so great? A small company depends on great people much more than a big company does. Okay, so to answer this question, the advantage that I have making founders and that you have as Skyrocket listening to founders is not only that I've read 300 entrepreneurs now, but I have all of my notes and highlights stored in my Readwise app, and that means I can search for any topic. I can look at past highlights of books, or I can search for keywords. So what I did is, first of all, like what I've started to do with these AMA questions is I read them, decide which ones I'm going to do next, and then think about it for a few days. I don't put any. I just literally that I know that's the next question. Just let my brain work on it in the background for a few days, and then I'll go through and start searching all my notes. And so that's what I did here. And so there's a bunch of, I don't know, I had like 10 or 15 different founders talking about hiring. The first idea is the most obvious, but I think probably works best when you're already established. So Steve Jobs is talking about, hey, great way to hire is just find great work and find the people that did that and then try to hire them. When you're Steve Jobs, that's a lot easier, right? Than if you're just somebody that doesn't have a reputation, maybe you don't have resources, maybe your company's rather new or not as well known. David Ogilvy, I just did Confessions of an Advertising Man a couple episodes ago, I think 306 or something like that, 307. And he did the same thing. But he's David Ogilvy at that point. So he'd go through magazines, find great advertising, great copywriting, and he'd write the person a letter. And then set up a phone call. And he says he was so well known, and he's one of the best in his field, that he wouldn't even have to offer a job, just the conversation, then the person he'd want to hire the person, never mention it, and the person would apply to him. And so again, I think if you can do that, then of course it's straightforward. Find somebody that does great work. Usually you can do this. I actually have a friend that I can't say who it is. He's doing this right now actually. I have a friend that's really good at doing this. He's finding people that do great stuff on the internet and then just cold DMing them and then convincing them to work on things. And that usually works, especially with people like younger people early in their career. There's a bunch of different ways to think about this and a bunch of different ways to prioritize. So the first thing that came to mind that I found surprising is you read any biography on Rockefeller, and he had a couple ideas where he felt the optimization, table stakes, that you're intelligent, you're driven, and you're hardworking, right? We don't even have, if you're listening to this, you already know that. But he prioritized hiring people with social skills. And so this is what he said: the ability to deal with people is as purchasable a commodity as sugar or coffee, and I pay more for that ability than any other under the sun. There's the second part to this stuff, and this also works well if you have access to the resources. Rockefeller would hire people as he found talented people, not as he needed them. Standard Oil has 6 open spots. Let's go find 6 candidates, right? He'd come across what he considered a talented person. He didn't know what he did. He's like, I'm just going to stack his team. And if you really think about his partners at Standard Oil, he essentially built a company, an executive team of founders, because he was buying up all their companies. So it's very rare. But there's a line from Titan I want to read to you. Taking for granted the growth of his empire, he hired talented people as found, not as needed. And then I found another idea in the hiring, like the actual interview process. So there's this guy named Vannevar Bush. I did 2 episodes on him. I think it's 270 and 271. He is the most important American ever in history in terms of connecting the scientific field, private enterprise, and the government. The most important person to keep alive for the American war effort was FDR. The second one was Vannevar Bush. He's like the Forrest Gump of this historical period. He is involved in everything, from the Manhattan Project to discovering a young Claude Shannon to building a mechanical computer. This guy literally has done it.
Okay, come on. Okay, don't do that. Okay, do 5.
You are reading about American business history during World War II and post-World War II. You are going to come across the name Vannevar Bush over and over again. I read his fantastic autobiography called Pieces of the Action, and I came across this weird highlight. And so this is his brilliant and unusual job interview process. And so he's talking about this organization he's running called AMRAD. At AMRAD, I hired a young physicist from Texas named C.G. Smith. The way I hired him is interesting. An interview of that sort is always likely to be on an artificial basis and somewhat embarrassing. So I discussed with him a technical point on which I was then genuinely puzzled. The next day, he came in with a neat solution, and I hired him at once. Here's another idea. This is from Nolan Bushnell. Nolan Bushnell is the founder of Atari, founder of Chuck E. Cheese, and Steve Jobs' mentor. He hired Steve Jobs when Steve Jobs was 19 at Atari. He would ask people their reading habits in interviews. This is why. One of the best ways, his whole thing was he wanted to build all of his companies laid on a foundation of creative people. So that's what he's looking for. He's like, I need creative people. One of the best ways to find creative people is to ask a simple question: what books do you like? I've never met a creative person in my life that didn't respond with enthusiasm to a question about reading habits. Actually, which books people read is not as important as the simple fact that they read at all.
I've known many talented engineers who hated science fiction but loved, say, books on birdwatching. A blatant but often accurate generalization. People who are curious and passionate read. People who are apathetic and indifferent don't. I remember... That's such a great line. Now I obviously agree with it. I remember one... I'm going to read it again. A blatant but often accurate generalization. People who are curious and passionate read. People who are apathetic and indifferent don't. I remember one particular woman who, during an interview, told me that she had read every book that I had read. So I started mentioning books I hadn't read, and she had read those too. I didn't know how someone in her late 20s found this much time to read so much. But I was impressed. I was so impressed that I hired her right there and assigned her to international marketing, which was having problems. This is why I'm reading this whole section. A job with a lot of moving parts benefits from a brain that has a lot of moving parts. It wouldn't be possible to have read that many books without such a brain. So you see what I mean? Like, we start with Steve Jobs saying this is the most important thing that your role as the leader of the company and the founder do, right? And it's so important to study, and this is why I'm glad this question exists, and why I'm glad that I took the time and I had like the foresight to go like, hey, I should really organize my thoughts and notes, because there's no way I would have remembered all this without being able to search my read list, right? But you have Rockefeller saying this is what's important to me. You have Bush saying this is how I hire. Now you have Nolan Bush now saying, well, here's another weird thing that I learned. Let me go through what Warren Buffett says about this. So this is about the quality. One thing that is consistent, whether it's Jobs, Buffett, Bezos, Peter Thiel, it's just
kind of cool.
Again, they talk about the importance of trying to find people that are better than you. The hiring bar constantly has to increase. Now, obviously, the larger the company gets, that's impossible. Steve Jobs has this great quote where he's like, Pixar was the first time I saw an entire company of A players. But they had 400 players. They had 400 team members. He's like, at the time, Apple had 3,000. It's like, it's impossible to have 3,000 A players. So there is some number that your company may grow to, where you're not going to have thousands of A players. In my argument, I don't even know if he has 400.
So slow. Gotta figure that out.
I'll take Steve's word for it on there. And Pixar definitely produce great products, but it's probably a lot lower than that as well. So Warren Buffett would tell you to use David Ogilvy's hiring philosophy. And so Warren said, Charlie and I know that the right players will make almost any team manager look good. Again, that is why it's the most important function of the founder. Maybe directly next to the product, or right above the product actually, because those people building your product. We subscribe to the philosophy of Ogilvy and Mather's founding genius, David Ogilvy. This is what Ogilvy said. Each of us hires people who are smaller than we are. We should become a company of dwarfs. But if each of us hires people who are bigger than we are, we should become a company of giants. Jeff Bezos used a variation of Ogilvy's idea too. Jeff used to say in Amazon, every time we hire someone, he or she should raise the bar for the next hire so that the overall talent pool is always improving. They talk about this idea in Amazon where the future hires that we do should be so good that if you had applied for the job you already have at Amazon, you wouldn't get in. That's a very interesting idea. Take your time with recruiting. Take your time with hiring. There's this great book on the history of PayPal. It's written by actually recently become friends with the author. His name is Jimmy Stoney. And this is in his book. The most fascinating thing that I found was that PayPal prioritized speed. So from the time they're founded to the time they sell to eBay, it's like 4 years. Jimmy spent more time researching the book than before. He spent 6 years researching the book. And I always tease him, like, you took longer on a book than they took to start and sell their company.
There we go.
It just speaks to like the quality he's trying to do. But that, as a byproduct of that, like obviously they move fast, but they prioritize speed over everything else except in one area.
SpaceX.
Max Levchin kept the bar for talent exceedingly
This
high.
one, we're
Even
gonna
at his
get
expense,
this
staffing.
rolling.
Max kept repeating, A's higher A's.
What you guys
B's
give me for
higher
this?
C's. So the first B
If I will get you
higher
a
takes
job
the whole company down. Let's read that again.
or an upper
A players
project.
hire A players, B players hire C players. So the first B player you hire takes the whole company
No.
down.
Speak full
Additionally,
width.
the company leaders mandated that all prospects, here's another idea for you, all prospects must meet every single member of the team. Now, the next one is the most bizarre. It makes sense if you study, I did this three-part series on Larry Ellison. I should read those books again, because the podcast is like 50 times bigger than when I publish those episodes, and he's just, it's crazy. So he would hire based on the self-confidence level
Damn straight.
of the candidate. Listen to this. I have tears in my eyes. I don't know why I'm laughing. Okay. It's just so because you read about Larry Ellison, and he's one of these people that's like really easy to interface with because you just know exactly who he is and what's important to him. That's why I think it's so funny. Ellison insisted that his recruiters hire only the finest and cockiest new college graduates. When they were recruiting from universities, they'd ask people, "Are you the smartest person you know?" And if they said yes, they would hire them. If they said no, they would say, "Who is?" and they would go hire that guy instead. I don't know if you got the smartest people that way, but you did. Ellison, and this is why. The personality of the founder is largely the culture of the company. Apple is Steve Jobs. Apple's just Steve Jobs with 10,000 lives, right? I was just texting a founder friend of mine. He listens to the podcast. I actually met him through the podcast. And he's going through this process of self-discovery. Like he's already started a bunch of companies that are really successful, but he's like, I think I'm more of this type founder than the other type of founder.
So here, check this out.
That's good that he's doing that because he's hopefully his next mission, you know. And you can't get your life's mission unless you figured out who you are. Ellison knew who he was. Ellison's swaggering, combative style became a part of the company's identity. This arrogant culture had a lot to do with Oracle's success. Here's another odd idea for you. Izzy actually could figure it out that in his business, which was hotels, right, that hiring persons could actually be a form of distribution for his hotel. He gave me the idea. Because what do you and I know in our bones? That his greatest founders all read biographies. They all read biographies of people that came before them and took ideas from them. Izzy Sharp is trying to build Four Seasons. What do you think he did? These are Ritz. The guy that Ritz-Carlton was named after. Arguably the greatest hotelier of all time. And when he realized that, oh shit, Ritz, he says, remembering that Cesar Ritz made
him actually
himself
on
world famous
LinkedIn.
by hiring some of the foremost chefs, we decided to do something
fine.
similar.
Okay.
So talking about Cesar Ritz went out and partnered with what Cesar Ritz was to building hotels.
They like to turn it
Obviously
off.
Famous to French cooking. And so what happens is you partner with world famous chefs, people come into your
I
restaurant
like that.
that's in the hotel because they're world famous chef, and now they know about your hotel. That leads to more guests. That leads to more
that's
your
it.
restaurant that you own, but also brand recognition of your
Go
hotel.
back
and
live.
by that, more people staying at the hotel. So
Never stop
hiring
on
as a
LinkedIn.
form of distribution. This is fascinating. That is a fascinating idea. Okay, here's the problem. You can identify great people, right? Maybe they even want to come work. Like you've identified them, you've sold them. Hey, this is our mission. This is what we're doing, and yet humans have complicated lives. They have kids, and maybe they can't move across the country.
I know better, but
to work for you, even though they want to. So, problem-solving element that you see in these books.
this guy might be actually legit.
You have to solve.
Actually, I like
You've already
this.
identified the person. You've recruited them.
Like
they
his
can't go for some
profile.
other reason. Okay. Well, the great founder.
I don't think I'm gonna get
different
like
answer.
one of
I
these.
read in
I gotta get back to
called
Meg.
Liftoff, which is about the first 6 years of SpaceX. This is what Elon Musk did. They had anticipated his friend's issue, has need to bring this brilliant young engineer from Turkey on board. It became a matter of solving the problem. His wife had a job in San Francisco. She would need in-laws for SpaceX's at the time. These were solvable problems, and Elon's better at solving problems than almost anyone else. Musk therefore came into his job interview prepared about told the guy that he wants to hire. Move to LA, and one of the reasons is that your wife works for Google. Well, I just talked to Larry, and they're going to transfer your wife down to LA. So to solve this problem, Musk had called his friend Larry Page, the co-founder of Google. The engineer sat and then he replied, given all that, he would come to work at SpaceX.
Let's get this guy. I'm gonna get everybody fucking grab a time. Look at this shit. Sucks.
From within or from without, you know, that's
Look at this.
depending on you, depending on what's going on. I do think this is interesting though. There's this guy named Les Schwab
Compared
who built
to
this really valuable chain of
Les Schwab.
like tire companies in the Pacific
Schwabi.
Northwest. I actually found out about him because Charlie Munger was like, hey, you should read this biography. He said it he didn't say it to me personally. He said it to in like one of the Berkshire meetings that to study. Les Schwab had one of the most one of the smartest financial incentive structures of any company that Charlie Munger had come across. So this is what Les Schwab did. He did not want to hire he didn't want to hire other people from other companies because they might come with bad habits. He liked to train his own executives. And so he says, in our 34 years of business, we have never hired a man from the outside.
every single one of our more than 250 managers and assistant managers started at the bottom changing tires. They have all earned their management job by working up. And then another thing, if you're going to hire the best of the best and A players don't like to be micromanaged. And so this came in Larry Gillis' called Driven. He owns like 93 companies all throughout Utah, car dealerships, movie theaters, all kinds of crazy stuff. But he also owned the NBA team, Utah Jazz. And what was fascinating is he's trying to recruit Jerry Sloan as the coach at the point. And Jerry Sloan would only take the job on one condition, and I really like it. I really like this idea. If you hire me, let me run the team of business, right? That's what you're hiring me for. One of the best things we had ever done was hire Jerry Sloan as coach. At the time, he said, I'm only going to ask you for one thing. If I get fired, let me get fired for my own decisions. If you hire me, let me run the team / business. Here's another idea from Thomas Edison that I think is fascinating. Really, the way I think about a founder is like you're developing skills that you can't hire for. You're going to hire for everything else, but you shouldn't be hireable. And Edison wasn't. Edison, expressing his views on the preeminent role of applied scientists, which that's what he considered himself, coined the expression, I can hire mathematicians, but they can't hire me. And so when I read that paragraph for the first time, the note I left myself was develop skills that you can't hire for. Capitalism rewards things that are both rare and valuable. Estee Lauder would give you advice that you need to hire people aligned with your thinking and values. Hire the best people. This is vital. Hire people who think as you do and treat them well. In our business, they are top priority. So this idea is like, that seems kind of weird. Like hire people who think like you. There's obviously not one right way to build a business. I think that your business should be an expression of your personality, who you are as a person at the core. And so I think there is an art to the building of your business. And the reason I use the word art, I don't mean it like a hoity-toity, pretentious manner. That's not me at all. I don't even care about art at all, really. I mean that you're making decisions not just based on economics. Like there are non-economic important decisions based on how you're building your business. Like you could probably make more money doing a decision A, but decision A goes against who you are as a person, or you just don't like it, or it's just not as elegant or beautiful. And so therefore you don't do it. So that's what I mean about, hire people who think as you do. And for whatever reason, when I read Estee Lauder say that, I was like, okay, there's like this art to what she's doing. One thing that's going to be helpful in recruiting, this comes from Peter Thiel. I think this is the book 0 to 1. Understand that most companies don't even differentiate their pitches to potential recruits into hiring. So therefore, like they're just going to as a byproduct that you're going to wind up with a lower overall talent base. And so he says, what's wrong with valuable stock, smart people, or pressing problems? Nothing. But every company makes these claims. So they won't help you stand out. General and undifferentiated pitches to join your company don't say anything about why a recruit should join your company instead of many others. So that idea of like your pitch, he would tell you you should be building an undifferentiated commodity business. But even above and beyond that, like the mission that you're trying to engage everybody to join you in, that pitch, that sale you're trying to make to potential recruit should be differentiated. Should not, if that person's applying to 5 other jobs, there should not be it's like they may not like your mission, they may not like your pitch, but they shouldn't be able to compare it to anything else. Another quote from Nolan Bushnell: hire for passion and intensity. That's what he would do. That's what he did when he found Steve Jobs. If there was a single characteristic that separates Steve Jobs from the mass of employees, it was his passion. I won't say ease. Steve had one speed, full blast. This was the primary reason we hired him. And one thing all these founders have in common is that they know how important hiring is, and when something's important, you do it yourself. This is again Elon Musk on hiring. Interviewed the first 3,000 employees at SpaceX. That's how important it was. One of Musk's most valuable skills was his ability to determine whether someone would fit his mold.
The other one
his people had to be brilliant. They had to be hardworking, and there could be no nonsense. There are a ton of companies out there, and not many who are the real deal, Musk said of his approach to interviewing engineers. I can usually tell within 15 minutes, and I can for sure tell within a few days of working with them. Musk made hiring a priority. He personally met with every single person the company hired through the first 3,000 employees. It required late nights and weekends, but he felt it was important to get the right people for his company. And then to close on this, we started with Steve Jobs telling us why it was so important and why it should be a large part of how you spend your time. And now we'll close with what you do after. What do you do after you hire the person? And this is what he says. It's not just recruiting. After recruiting, it's building an environment that makes people feel they are surrounded by equally talented people and their work is bigger than they are. the feeling that their work will have a tremendous influence and is part of a strong, clear vision. So that is the end to that 20-minute mini episode. I just re-listened to the whole thing, and it really does, I think, it's a perfect explanation and illustration of why I think Founder's Notes is so valuable. Because some of those books I haven't read in 5-6 years, and just
Mac
the
Wabbit.
ability to have a searchable database of all these
Got
ideas,
that one.
this collective knowledge of some of history's greatest
Gotta grab it,
authors
Tom.
to reference, and then contextually apply to our own businesses. It's nothing short of, like, it's magic. That's really the way I think about it. I think it's a massive superpower. It gives me a massive
A
superpower.
webhook?
Hoping to make
Oh,
podcasts
should
better.
get a webhook.
I also think if you have access to it, it'll
That's
make
what it's
your
trying to
business
rely on.
And so if you're already
Makes
running a successful business, I highly recommend you invest in a subscription, and you can do that
Fuck.
over at foundersnotes.com.
This is about Devon Invit X. Cloudfire Tunnel. That looks good. That's how they get you.
A man spent 2 years living in a cabin he built himself, and we've been arguing about what it means ever since. Not whether he did it, but why. Not what happened there, but what we're supposed to learn from it. Henry David Thoreau walked into the woods in 1845 and somehow never left our collective imagination. But here's what nobody tells you about Thoreau, the guy everyone pictures as a reclusive hermit communing with nature. He lived less than 2 miles from town, the radical who rejected society. His mom did his laundry, the man who supposedly cut himself off from civilization. He had dinner parties at the cabin and walked into Concord almost daily. Everything you think you know about Thoreau is partially true, completely misleading. He's been turned into a symbol, a meme, a vague idea about simplicity and nature. Meanwhile, the actual person, a complicated, contradictory, brilliant, and sometimes insufferable human being, has disappeared behind the legend. That's the story worth telling. Not the myth of the hermit sage, but the reality of someone trying to figure out how to live in a world that didn't make sense to him. July 12, 1817. Concord, Massachusetts. A third child arrives in a
I'm gonna
family
change
that's
it.
always struggling. They named him David Henry Thoreau after an uncle who
Better.
recently died. Years later, the
And nobody's
Thoreau
gonna pay
because
attention.
everyone calls him Henry anyway, but he never bothers making it legal.
If you do, all you're gonna get is access to all my apps running locally.
And ignored others based on criteria that made sense only to him. His father, John Thoreau, ran a pencil factory. Ran is generous, operated is more accurate. The business existed, produced pencils, generated barely enough income to keep the family afloat. John Thoreau was what people charitably call a small businessman, and uncharitably call unsuccessful. He moved the family constantly, chasing better prospects. Concord to Chelmsford, back to Concord. Boston, back to Concord again. By the time Henry was 6, he'd lived in 4 different places. His mother, Cynthia Dunbar Thoreau, was the opposite. Energetic, practical, bustling. She took in boarders to make ends meet. While John tinkered with pencil production, Cynthia ran the household, managed the finances, and generally kept everything from falling apart. Their home was constantly full of strangers, paying for rooms and meals. Privacy was a luxury the Thoreaus couldn't afford. Henry was a weird
Oops.
kid, not troubled, just odd, serious, grave. Adults joked that he seemed like a tiny judge, always observing, always thinking. His older brother John was the fun one, popular with other kids, easy with people. Henry was the one who sat quietly watching, absorbing, filing away observations he'd used decades later. The family settled permanently in Concord in 1823, when Henry was 6. This would be the place that defined him. spend much of his life trying to define his relationship to it. Small town, about 2,000 people, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and that familiarity breeds both comfort and suffocation. In 1828, Henry and John Jr. enrolled at Concord Academy. Progressive for its time, which meant it didn't beat knowledge into students quite as enthusiastically as other schools. Henry thrived there. Not socially, he never thrived socially, but intellectually. He was good at school in that specific way that makes you suspect education is the thing you're designed for, even if you're not sure what you're supposed to do with it afterward. His family recognised this. Despite their limited means, despite John Sr.'s suggestion that maybe Henry should learn carpentry or cabinet making, something practical, Cynthia insisted he go to Harvard. This wasn't a casual decision. Harvard cost money they didn't have. Tuition was $55 a year. With books and room and board, the total came to $179. For context, that was more than many families earned in a year. The entire family contributed. Siblings, aunts, everyone pitched in to send Henry to college. He took the entrance exams in summer 1833. Barely passed. That's important. This wasn't a prodigy breezing through. This was a smart kid from a struggling family scraping by on collective sacrifice. Harvard in the 1830s was not what they were imagining. It wasn't the intellectual powerhouse it would become. It was a finishing school for rich boys, and a few scholarship students, like Thoreau, who didn't quite fit. The curriculum was rigid, classical, designed to produce gentlemen.
They did a RAG database. They were like, ooh.
Latin, Greek, mathematics, rhetoric. You memorized, recited, you demonstrated that you'd absorbed the approved texts. Thoreau did fine. Not brilliant, not struggling. Top half of his class when he graduated in 1837. But something more important than grades happened at Harvard. He started reading beyond the curriculum. He discovered authors who saw the world differently. He encountered ideas that suggested maybe the way everyone lived wasn't the only option. And in 1837, he met Ralph Waldo Emerson, or rather, he encountered Emerson's ideas. Nature had just been published, and it was electrifying in a small circle of intellectuals in New England. Emerson argued that direct experience of the natural world could reveal truths that institutions and traditions obscured, that you didn't need intermediaries, priests or professors, between yourself and reality.
This, though.
Required stripping away convention and connecting with something fundamental. For a 20-year-old, who'd always felt slightly out of step with normal life, this was permission. Validation that the discomfort wasn't a flaw, potentially a strength. But first, he had to figure out how to make a living. It's 1837. The economy is in a depression. Jobs are scarce. Thoreau has a Harvard degree and no clear path forward. He takes a teaching position at Concord Center School. It lasts 2 weeks. The school required teachers to use corporal punishment. Beating students was standard practice, considered necessary for discipline. Thoreau refused. When the school committee insisted, he administered a few token whippings to random students to demonstrate how absurd the policy was, and quit. This is classic Thoreau. Principles over practicality, but in a way that's both admirable and frustrating. He didn't just refuse quietly. He made a point, alienated the people who hired him, and left himself unemployed on principle. So he and his brother John decided to start their own school. The Thoreau Academy opened in 1838, operating on radically different principles. No corporal punishment, hands-on learning, field trips to local businesses to see how things actually worked. Students went to the newspaper office, the gunsmith, the various workshops around Concord. They took walks in the woods where Henry would point out plants and animals and geological features. It was progressive education before that term existed. The kind of teaching that emphasised understanding over memorization, curiosity over obedience. And it worked. The school attracted students, gained a reputation. For 3 years, the brothers ran a successful experiment in alternative education. Then Ellen Sewell arrived. She was visiting Concord from Cape Cod, and both brothers fell for her. This is where the story gets messy, in that particularly human way that complicates clean narratives. John proposed to Ellen first. She turned him down. Then Henry proposed. She accepted, briefly. Then her father intervened. The Sewall family had heard about the Thoreau's religious views. Too liberal, too transcendental, too much question of traditional Christianity. Ellen's father forbade the marriage, and she complied. Henry would tell his sister, Sophia, years later, on his deathbed, that he never got over Ellen. That admission hangs there. The man who would write about self-reliance and living deliberately carried this particular wound his entire life. The school continued for a while, but in 1841, John Jr.'s health began failing. Tuberculosis was suspected. They closed the academy. Henry needed work again. This time, Emerson offered a solution. Come live with us. Help with household tasks, yard work, whatever needs doing. In exchange, room, board, and access to Emerson's extensive library. Thoreau moved into the Emerson household in 1841. He was 24. Emerson was 14 years older, wealthy, established, connected. The relationship was mentor and protege, but also more complicated. Emerson saw potential in Thoreau, but also something that made him uncomfortable. Thoreau's radicalism went further than Emerson's. His willingness to actually live according to principles, rather than just write about them, created a contrast that highlighted Emerson's own compromises. For Thoreau, living with the Emersons provided stability and intellectual stimulation.
Come on, man.
He had
Better
access to
than
books
this.
he couldn't afford. Conversations with visiting intellectuals, time to read and write, but he was also essentially a handyman in someone else's house. The tension between his intellectual ambitions and his practical circumstances was becoming sharper. Then on New Year's Day, 1842, everything changed. John Jr. was shaving. The razor slipped, a tiny cut on his finger. Nothing really. Except this was before antibiotics, before understanding of infection. The cut became infected. Within days, John's finger turned black. The infection spread. Lockjaw set in. Tetanus is a horrible way to die. Your muscles contract uncontrollably. Your jaw locks shut. You're conscious as your body destroys itself. John Jr. died on January 11th, 1842, in Henry's arms. He was 27 years old. Henry's reaction was extreme, even by the standards of grief. He developed psychosomatic symptoms of lockjaw himself. For days he exhibited the same symptoms and had killed his brother, though there was no physical cause. His body was manifesting trauma that his mind couldn't process. He recovered physically within a week, but something fundamental had broken. John Jr. had been his closest friend, his business partner, his companion in the world. They'd run the school together. They'd loved the same woman. They'd shared a vision of how education could work differently. Now Henry was alone.
This son of a bitch to fix it.
Alone with the question of what to do with a life that suddenly felt desperately finite. His brother had died from a shaving accident. Random, meaningless. If that's how fragile existence was, what were you supposed to do with the time?
You got it, buddy. Come on.
Thoreau spent the next 3 years wrestling with that question. He continued
fuck
living
went
with
back?
Emerson's. He did odd jobs. He
They
worked
had
in his
to-
father's pencil factory, where he actually made significant improvements to the production process by researching German.
If it runs,
techniques.
we fixed it.
The Rowe family pencils became known as the best in America, largely because of Henry's technical
Come on.
innovations. He also started writing
Come on.
seriously.
Come on.
Essays, observations about nature, thoughts about how people lived. The journal he'd started at Harvard became a daily practice,
Come on.
a place where he worked out ideas that would eventually become published work. But he was restless. The life he was living didn't match the life he was thinking about. He was writing about authentic existence,
The fuck?
doing yard work for
That different
someone else,
hair?
thinking about simplicity while embedded in a comfortable household. The contradiction was becoming unbearable. By early 1845, he knew something had to change. He needed to test his ideas against reality. Not just think about how to live deliberately, but actually
Bullshit.
follow it.
Ah.
The question was how, where, what form that experiment would take. And that's when he remembered a conversation from his Harvard days. A classmate had once built a small hut by a pond, a place to read and think away from distractions. The idea had seemed interesting at the time. Now it felt like a solution. Emerson owned land near Walden Pond, about 2 miles south of Concord. Thoreau asked if he could build a cabin there. Emerson agreed. In spring 1845, Thoreau began planning the experiment that would define him. He was 28 years old. His brother had been dead for 3 years. The woman he loved had married someone else. His career was a series of false starts and compromises. He was going to build a cabin in the woods and figure out how to live. He started building on July 4th, 1845, Independence Day. The symbolism was almost too obvious, but Thoreau wasn't subtle about this kind of thing. He was declaring independence from the life everyone expected him to live. The cabin went up fast. Thoreau knew carpentry from working on houses during college breaks. Practical skills that Harvard didn't teach, but that turned out to matter more than Greek conjugations. He bought the boards from a shanty owned by James Collins, an Irish labourer who'd worked on the railroad, $8 for the materials. He salvaged what he could, reused everything possible. The structure was simple. 10 feet by 15 feet.
Why not?
One room, a door, 2
I wonder what
windows,
it's doing.
a fireplace he'd add later. The whole thing cost him $28 and 12.5 cents. Meticulous records of every expense, because the point wasn't just to live cheaply.
I don't mean I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna keep going.
Exactly how cheap
I got
you
another
could
12
live.
hours in me.
You stop pretending
at least.
you needed things you didn't. People called it an experiment. Thoreau hated that word. Experiments happened in laboratories, controlled environments where you manipulated variables. This wasn't that. This was just trying to live honestly, instead of playing along with society's elaborate charade about what constituted necessary life. The location mattered. Walden Pond was close enough to Concord.
Got it. So what was that actually?
Far enough that he couldn't hear the
Yeah.
church bells or the train whistle unless the wind was right. The pond itself was a glacial kettle, formed 10,000 years ago when a massive ice block melted and left a depression that filled with water, nearly 2 miles around. Deep enough in the centre that locals claimed it was bottomless, though Thoreau would eventually measure it at exactly 102 feet. The woods around it was second growth, recovering from being cleared for farmland decades earlier. White pine, oak, pitch pine. Not wilderness by any real definition.
This thing too. I've
Wild,
got to get this
quiet,
tunnel figured out.
empty enough that he could think without the constant interruption of other people's expectations. He moved in before the cabin was
Codex.
finished, slept on the floor while he built the bed, cooked over an outdoor fire while he constructed the chimney. The incompleteness was part of it. You didn't need perfection to start living. You just needed enough. What did he do all day? Walked, wrote,
Bitch, man.
worked his bean field, read, thought. The routine sounds monotonous described like that, but monotony was the point. Remove the chaos and you discover what's actually there underneath. Mornings he'd work
I'm
the
gonna do this
bean
one for
2.5
grab a
acres
time.
planted in early June. Before the cabin was done, he'd cleared the land himself, turning over soil that hadn't been cultivated in 15 years. The beans were practical, food and a cash crop, but they were also philosophical. You put seeds in the ground, you pulled weeds, you watched things grow. The process couldn't be rushed or outsourced or optimized beyond a certain point. It operated on its own timeline. He'd work until the sun got too hot, then retreat to the cabin to write. The journal was daily now, thousands of words tracking everything he noticed, the colour of the pond at different times of day, which birds arrived when, how ice formed and melted, what people said when they visited, his own thoughts about economy, about time, about what constituted wealth. Afternoons were for reading. He'd brought his books from Emerson's house, Homer in Greek, the Bhagavad Gita, Confucius. He read slowly, the same way he walked, paying attention to everything.
I don't want to do them all.
Page an hour sometimes. Not because the material was difficult, but because he refused to consume it like fuel. Books weren't something you got through. They were something you inhabited. Evenings he'd walk around the pond or into town, or just sit watching the water. He became obsessed with the pond's moods, the way it changed colour with the light and the season and the weather. Sometimes green, sometimes blue, sometimes reflecting the sky so perfectly you couldn't tell where water ended and air began. The solitude wasn't absolute. That's another myth about Walden. Thoreau wasn't a hermit. He had visitors constantly. Emerson walked out regularly. Other Concord intellectuals made the trip. Farmers stopped by. Runaway slaves passed through using the cabin as a station on the Underground Railroad. His mother and sisters visited every week, usually bringing food he claimed.
God, it looks
he
just
needed,
like Vercel. What the
accepted
fuck?
anyway.
It's
He
weird.
also
Who
went to
stole
town
who?
frequently, borrowed books
Jesus
from the
Christ.
library,
Look at
attended
this.
lectures, had dinner with friends. The cabin was 2 miles
It's a
from his
little
parents' house.
awkward.
He'd walk there, eat his mother's cooking.
Where's
walk back.
Guillermo?
This happened more often than the mythology
Fucking
suggests.
Guillermo.
The point wasn't isolation, it was
Alright,
autonomy.
I got it.
The difference matters. Isolation is running away from society. Autonomy is choosing when and how you engage with it. What was he learning? That most of what people called necessity
not easy.
was actually habit. That you could live richly on almost nothing if you redefined richness to mean time instead of possessions. That the natural world operated according to patterns you
No.
only noticed if you paid attention, and that those patterns revealed something about how to live. He calculated everything. 6 weeks of work per year could meet all his material needs.
This is too
The
complicated.
rest of the time was his. 46
I know how to
weeks
do
of
this shit, and I
freedom
don't know what the fuck
purchased
this
with 6
means.
weeks of labour. Compare that to how most people lived, working 50 weeks to pay for things they didn't need and didn't have time to enjoy because they were working. The math was simple but radical. If you eliminated unnecessary expenses, you eliminated the need for the labour that paid for them, which meant you reclaimed the time that labour consumed. Time was the real currency. Everything else
Wait a few
was
hours?
just a medium of exchange.
For fucking
His
Christ's
neighbours
sake,
thought he
man.
was wasting his life. A Harvard graduate,
That's not what I need.
living in a shack, growing beans, going nowhere. What kind of career was that? What kind of future? They were measuring by the wrong metrics. Accumulation, status, progress up some imaginary ladder. Thoreau was measuring it by freedom, by the ability to spend his days doing what he considered worthwhile instead of what someone else valued. The writing happened in notebooks first, observations and ideas that would eventually become Walden. But he was also working on something else, a book about the trip he'd taken with his brother John 5 years earlier, before John died. A week on the Concord and Merrimack rivers, travelling by boat through Massachusetts and New Hampshire in September 1839. That manuscript was an act of mourning, disguised as a travel narrative. Every description of the landscape was haunted by John's absence. Every philosophical digression was really about loss and time, and the impossibility of holding on to anything. We'd been working for 3 years, using it to process grief we couldn't express directly. The cabin gave him space to finish it, away from well-meaning friends who wanted him to move on, away from the house where John had died, away from everything that reminded him of what he'd lost except the words he was trying to shape into meaning. Winter came. People asked how he'd survive. Would he freeze, starve, give up and slink back to civilization? They were disappointed when he did fine. The cabin stayed warm enough with the fireplace. Food was adequate. The pond froze solid. Ice thick enough to walk on. He'd measure its depth at different points. Drill holes to study how ice formed from the top down. Document everything with the precision of a scientist and the attention of a poet. January was the hardest month. Not because of the cold, but because of the isolation. The visitors stopped coming. The days were short. The landscape was monochromatic. This was when the experiment felt most real, when comfort and habit couldn't sustain you, and you had to actually believe in what you were doing. He read the Bhagavad Gita that winter, sitting by the fire while ice expanded on the pond outside. The Hindu text spoke about duty and action and the self's relationship to the world. Different words than Emerson used, but pointing toward the same ideas, that the material world was less real than it appeared. That consciousness was the primary reality, that you could live in society without being of it. Thoreau was trying to work out a practical philosophy, not just an intellectual one. Ideas that didn't change how we lived were just decoration. He wanted to know what actually worked, what you could build a life on that wouldn't collapse when tested. Spring arrived like a resurrection. Ice melted, the pond opened, birds returned, everything dead came back to life. Thoreau planted his beans again, extending the field slightly, refining his technique. The second year was easier than the first because he knew what to expect. The novelty was gone, but the purpose remained. What he was discovering, he'd later write, was that he'd gone to the woods to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, to see if he could learn what it had to teach and not discover, when he came to die, that he had not lived. That last phrase was the key. The fear wasn't death. The fear was reaching the end, and realising you spent your entire existence doing what you were supposed to do instead of what you actually wanted. That you traded the only non-renewable resource, time, for things that didn't matter. That you died without ever really living. This wasn't abstract philosophy. This was survival instruction for people drowning in lives they'd somehow agreed to without meaning to. Thoreau was testing whether there was another way.
Did you do it?
Whether you could step off the treadmill and discover it kept running without you.
Nope.
Whether you needed it at all. July 1846. He'd been at the pond for a year. One afternoon he walked to town to pick up a shoe from a cobbler. Simple errand. But on the way he ran into Sam Staples.
I'm going to move this over so people can see this.
Staples asked if Thoreau had paid his poll tax. Thoreau said no, he hadn't, and he wasn't planning to. The tax supported the Mexican-American War and the institution of slavery. Thoreau opposed both. He wouldn't fund them. This wasn't a spontaneous protest. Thoreau had been refusing to pay the tax for years. Usually Staples just ignored it, but this time, for whatever reason, he decided to enforce the law. He arrested Thoreau and took him to jail. The Concord jail was a small brick building. Thoreau spent the night in a cell with a man accused of burning down a barn. They talked about their situations. Thoreau found his cellmate more honest than most people he knew in polite society. The next morning, someone, probably his Aunt Maria, paid the tax. Thoreau was released. He was furious, not about being jailed, about being free. He'd wanted to make a point about civil disobedience, about the right and duty to refuse cooperation with injustice. Having someone pay on his behalf undermined the whole thing. He went back to Walden Pond, angry and energised. The experience would become an essay, eventually published as Civil Disobedience, that would influence Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and every non-violent resistance movement that followed. But that was later. In the moment, it was just one night in jail and a philosophical question about what you owed to a government acting immorally. The second year at Walden continued.
Nothing.
More writing, more observation.
So let's see if we can
But
get this.
something was shifting. The experiment had proven what it needed to prove. He knew now that you could live on almost nothing. That simplicity was possible.
Settings, come on.
Nature operated according to patterns you could learn. That time mattered more than money. The question was what came next. You couldn't stay at Walden Pond forever. Or you could.
Yeah, see, because it's
but then it would
backwards.
Stop being an experiment and become just another route to life.
Stupid.
The point wasn't to
I
escape
guess it
society
doesn't look
permanently.
backwards, but
It was to understand it clearly enough
what do you
you could
think?
engage with it
So-
on your own
It's my
terms.
IQ logo.
In September 1847, after 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, Thoreau left Walden
No.
Pond. Emerson had asked him to watch his house, while Emerson travelled to Europe to lecture. Thoreau agreed. He packed his
Oh,
books,
no.
closed up the cabin, and
Wow.
walked back to Concord. People assumed he'd failed. He couldn't hack it in the woods. had to return to civilization. They were missing the point entirely. He hadn't been hiding from the world. He'd been studying how to live in it. Now it was time to apply what he'd learned. Slightly paraphrased from Putnam.org, back at the Emerson house, Thoreau settled into a familiar rhythm. He managed the household, did repairs, tended the garden. Emerson was in England giving lectures, building his reputation as America's leading intellectual. Thoreau was fixing doors and organising bookshelves. The arrangement
I see myself until I get on the View.
Thoreau is Emerson's handyman, his assistant, his lesser companion. People in Concord saw it that way.
You can't even tell that's an IQ, right?
You recognised Thoreau's
It's got
intelligence,
to be
his independence of thought. But you also
backwards?
noticed
How the fuck do I
something
do that?
He was restless. The Walden experiment had changed him in ways that made ordinary life feel constraining. He worked on his manuscript, the book about his time at the pond. He'd been drafting it during those 2 years, filling journals with observations about seasons and ice and the economics of bean farming. Now he needed to shape it to something publishable. The problem was finding time between household duties and his actual paid work, because Thoreau needed money. The Walden experiment had proven you could live cheaply, but it hadn't solved the fundamental problem of capitalism. You still needed some income. He worked at his father's pencil factory, applying his knowledge of chemistry to improve the graphite mixture. Thoreau pencils became among the best in America, largely because of Henry's innovations. He also did surveying. Turned out his Harvard education in mathematics had practical applications. Concord landowners needed property lines established, boundaries marked, acreage calculated. Thoreau was precise and reliable. He charged fair rates and delivered accurate work. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. He took him outdoors, which he preferred to factory work. He walked Concord's fields and forests with his instruments, measuring and mapping. He noticed everything. Which trees grew where, how water flowed, where animals made their paths. The surveying became another form of natural observation, just with trigonometry involved. His journal entries from this period show someone trying to reconcile different parts of himself. A philosopher who wanted to think about ultimate questions. The naturalist who wanted to catalogue every plant and bird. The writer who wanted to shape language into art. The citizen who wanted to respond to political injustice. The son who needed to help support his family.
It's not doing it though.
Compartmentalize these roles. Thoreau wanted them unified. He wanted work
changing their shit.
That was also study, that was also spiritual practice, that was also service to something larger than himself. This wasn't idealism exactly. More like stubbornness, a refusal to accept that life had to be divided into what you wanted to do and what you had to do. In January 1848, he gave a lecture at the Concord Lyceum. The topic was the rights and duties of the individual in relation to government. This was his jail experience formalised into philosophy. He'd spent almost 2 years thinking about what it meant to refuse cooperation with injustice. The lecture argued that individual conscience superseded government.
Wish I could do it. Can I just flip it? No, I can't.
Moral responsibility to elected officials with majority vote. That when government acted immorally, you had not just the right, but the duty.
See what I'm trying to do.
That this resistance should be non-violent, but absolute. The Concord audience listened politely. Some agreed, some disagreed, most were indifferent. It was just another lecture at the Lyceum. Weekly entertainment for educated New Englanders. Thoreau revised the text and tried to get it published. It finally appeared in 1849 in a short-lived magazine called Aesthetic Papers under the title Resistance to Civil Government. Almost nobody read it. Meanwhile, he kept working on the Walden manuscript.
I hate it though. I hate the way I look.
He had hundreds of pages of
Reverse, it's really weird.
anecdotes, philosophical reflections.
It's so weird. I hate the way it looks.
How do you organise that into a coherent book? He tried chronological order, following the seasons. He tried thematic chapters, grouping similar ideas. Nothing quite worked. The other problem was tone.
I hate you're so used to seeing your face one way.
humorous and
Another,
deadly
but-
serious. It criticised society while acknowledging Thoreau's dependence on it. It praised solitude while describing constant visitors. It claimed to offer a blueprint for simple living while admitting most people couldn't or wouldn't
I have to
follow
like
it.
kind of hit it
These
from an
contradictions
angle.
weren't bugs, they were
Oh, there we go.
features. Thoreau wasn't writing
That's
a
kinda cool,
how-to
huh?
manual. He was trying to capture the complexity of
Alright.
actually trying to live deliberately. The gap between philosophy and practice. The tension between withdrawal and engagement.
Try to get the IQ.
Publishers wanted something simpler. A nature book or a philosophy book or a social critique. Pick one. Thoreau couldn't. The whole point is that these things were inseparable. How you lived was what you believed. Your daily choices were your real philosophy. In 1849, he published his first book, A Week on the
Cool.
Concord and Merrimack Rivers. It was about a boat trip he'd taken with his wife
Oh shit.
back in 1839, before John's death. The book mixed travel narrative with essays on poetry, friendship, Christianity, and whatever else interested Thoreau. He paid for publication himself, a risky move. The publisher printed
I don't know if that's gonna
1,000
stay.
copies.
Whatever.
Over the next 4 years, they sold fewer than 300. Thoreau ended up with a debt of $290 and a house full of unsolved
Alright, let's get back to
books.
work.
He joked about it later. I have
I
now
gotta
a
sign for
library of
Ingrok.
nearly 900 volumes,
I fucking
over
want to.
700 of which I wrote myself. The failure stung. Not just financially. It suggested that maybe nobody wanted what he was offering. Maybe his particular combination of nature observation and philosophical reflection and social criticism didn't have an audience. Maybe he should stick to surveying and pencil making. He kept working on Walden,
Excuse me.
revising, restructuring, refining. He went through 7 complete drafts over 8 years. Each version got tighter, more focused, more deliberately crafted. The casual reader thinks Thoreau just wrote down what happened at the end. Actually, every sentence was polished until it achieved the effect he wanted. During these years, his relationship with Emerson changed. He'd been
From
mentor and student, older established writer and younger aspirant. Now Thoreau was developing his own voice, his own philosophy. He was moving away from pure transcendentalism towards something more grounded in physical reality, in ecology, in the specific details of natural processes. Emerson noticed. He still valued Thoreau, but also felt frustrated by him. Why wasn't Henry more ambitious? Why did he refuse opportunities to lecture widely, to build a reputation, to become a public intellectual? Why did he insist on doing manual labour when he could be in Boston or New York, making a name for himself? Thoreau's answer was that he'd already found what he was looking for, not success or fame or influence, understanding, direct contact with reality, unmediated by ambition or social expectation. Why would he trade that for a lecture circuit? The disagreement was fundamental. Emerson believed in progress, in reform, in using ideas to change society. Thoreau believed in resistance, in refusal, in living your principles regardless of society's response. Emerson wanted to improve the world. Thoreau wanted to live in it honestly. Their friendship didn't break, but they still saw each other, still talked, but the easy intimacy was gone.
shit.
Emerson was disappointed in Thoreau's achievement. Thoreau did in Emerson's conventional ambitions. In 1850, Thoreau's father died. This meant Henry had to take over the pencil business, at least partially.
Oh shit.
More of his time went to manufacturing and
The fuck?
sales, sitting and walking. He resented it, but did it. Family duty wasn't something you could transcend through philosophy. His mother Cynthia became more demanding. She'd always been the forceful one in the family, the one who insisted Henry go to Harvard, the one who ran the boarding house and managed the finances. With John Sr. gone, she relied on Henry more. He lived at home, contributed to household expenses, helped with her various. It was life he'd imagined, but whose life matches their imagination? That was part of what Walden was about. The gap between what we think we want and what we actually do. The compromises we make, the obligations we accept, the ways we negotiate between ideals and reality. He still walked, every day, usually for 4 hours. This was non-negotiable. His real work, he said, was observing nature. Everything else, the surveying and pencil making and household repairs, that was just how he funded the real work. His journals from the 1850s fill thousands of pages. Detailed observations of plant succession, animal behaviour, seasonal patterns. He was developing what we'd now call ecological awareness, understanding how systems interrelate, how energy flows through ecosystems, how communities of organisms create and maintain environments. Nobody cared. This wasn't science in the professional sense. Thoreau had no laboratory, no institutional affiliation, no credentials. He was an amateur naturalist in an era when that was becoming suspect. Real science was moving towards specialization, quantification, controlled experiments. Thoreau was just walking around writing down what he noticed. But what he noticed mattered. He tracked ice-out dates on Walden Pond for years, creating a record that modern climate scientists now use. He documented plant phenology, when different species leafed out and bloomed, data that shows how climate has changed over 170 years. He described forest succession processes that academic ecologists wouldn't formalise for another century. His surveying work gave him a detailed map of Concord in his mind. He knew every swamp and hillside, every stream and woodlot. He could tell you which fields had been cleared when, which forests were regrowing after logging, how human activity shaped the landscape. This knowledge was both practical and philosophical, understanding how humans and nature interacted, how we changed the land and it changed us. In 1851, he began a project that would occupy him for the rest of his life, a comprehensive natural history of Concord. He wanted to document everything, every plant species, every bird, every mammal, insect, fish, their behaviours, their ranges, their seasonal patterns. It was an impossible task, but he pursued it systematically. This was Thoreau the scientist, often overlooked in favour of Thoreau the philosopher, or Thoreau the political radical. He developed methods for careful observation. He learned to distinguish between what he actually saw and what he assumed. He recognised his own biases and tried to account for them. He understood that perception was selective, that you saw what you expected to see unless you trained yourself otherwise. The training involved patience, sitting still for hours watching a bird's nest or an ant colony, returning to the same spot repeatedly to track changes, taking measurements, making sketches, recording data. This wasn't romantic communing with nature. It was work. Hard, meticulous, often tedious work. But it produced insights. Thoreau started noticing patterns that weren't in the natural history books. How certain plants always grew together. How bird migration timing correlated with food availability. How forest composition changed in predictable sequences. He was seeing ecology before the field had a name. His other project was Walden, still revising, still not published. Publishers had rejected it multiple times.
A lot of shit
Too
to do.
strange, too angry, too hard to categorise. Thoreau kept working on it anyway. By 1852, he'd completed a 6th draft. The structure was finally right. 18 chapters following a year at the pond, but compressed and rearranged to create thematic unity. The book opened with Economy, a long analysis of how people spend their lives and what they get in return. It was part autobiography, part social criticism, part practical advice. Thoreau detailed his expenses at Walden down to the cent, then asked what the reader was spending their life on, not just money, time, energy, attention. Later chapters covered different aspects of the experiment. Sounds described what you heard when you stopped talking. Solitude explained why being alone wasn't lonely. Visitors catalogued the people who came to the cabin. The bean field detailed agricultural economics and the pleasure of honest work. Higher laws wrestled with the tension between wild instinct and civilized morality. The final chapters tracked the seasons. Housewarming described preparing for winter. Former inhabitants told the history of people who'd lived near the pond before. Winter animals catalogued who remained active in the cold. The pond in winter explored ice and its meanings. Spring celebrated renewal. The book ended with conclusion, which wasn't really a conclusion, more like a challenge. If you've read this far, Rose said, don't just admire it, do something. Not necessarily move to the woods, that wasn't the point. The point was to live deliberately, to examine your assumptions, to resist the momentum of conventional life, to wake up. In 1854, after 8 years of revision, Walden was finally published. The first printing was 2,000 copies. It sold slowly, but steadily. Reviews were mixed. Some praised its originality and moral force. Others found it arrogant and impractical. Most readers didn't know what to make of it. Thoreau didn't care much about reviews. He'd written the book he needed to write. Whether it found an audience was secondary. The real question was whether he could live according to his own principles, and that was a daily struggle with no final answer. The slavery question wouldn't leave him alone. Every day the contradictions pressed harder. Massachusetts claimed to be free soil, but the state enforced federal fugitive slave laws.
Some good people back then,
Concord
actually.
residents considered themselves progressive, but they bought products made by enslaved labour. Thoreau's neighbours
Way too
opposed
close.
slavery in principle while participating in the system that sustained it. He started
Where's
refusing
my
to pay his poll tax in
webcam app? Yeah.
1842. The tax wasn't large, just $1 or $2, but it supported a government that protected slavery and was prosecuting an unjust war against Mexico to expand slave territory.
Unjust? Who's
Paying
to
it meant
decide that?
consent.
I don't know about that.
Thoreau wouldn't consent. For 4 years, nobody back.
Just only because we
Small town tax
beat him really
collection
bad.
was informal. If someone didn't pay, the collector might ask politely, then forget about it. But
I don't want to get all the
an
sleep
unjust
shit. I
war
don't know why it's
against
so much.
Mexico to expand slave territory. Paying it meant consent. Thoreau wouldn't consent. For 4 years, nobody bothered him about it. Small town tax collection was informal. If someone didn't pay, the collector might ask politely, then forget about it. In July 1846, Sam Staples, the Concord constable,
Nothing stranger ever came out of the story of this poor Scotch boy who came to America and step by step, through many trials and trials, became the great steelmaster.
Damn it.
Built up a colossal industry, amassed an enormous fortune, and systematically gave away all of it for the enlightenment and betterment of mankind. Not only that, he established a gospel of wealth that can be neither ignored nor forgotten, and set a pace of distribution that succeeding millionaires have followed as a precedent. That is an excerpt from the book that I'm going to talk about today, which is written over 100 years ago, which is the autobiography.
Just by myself.
This is my second time reading the autobiography of Andrew Carnegie. A few years ago, I did a 3-part series on Andrew
okay.
Carnegie and his partner Henry Clay. If you're interested in diving deeper in that, it's episode 73, 74, and 75. To prepare for this podcast, not only did I reread Andrew Carnegie's autobiography, but I reread all my notes and highlights from that fantastic book, which I did on episode 73, which is called Meet You in Hell, Andrew Carnegie, Henry Clay Frick, and the Bitter Partnership with her. And so it occurred to me last night as I was rereading my highlights from Meet You in Hell, there's a handful of highlights that I think I should tell you first before we jump into Carnegie's audio. I think will give you context of how he approached building his businesses and what he had in common with hers and Henry Clay Frick, obviously one of them, which is his partner, but also Jay and John D. Rockefeller. And it's this like learning bookkeeping because they thought that was the language of business. And what these guys all had in common is they were hell bent on knowing their business down to the last cent. They were obsessed with having the lowest
too
cost
much.
structure out of anybody in their industry. And so here's a few highlights from Meet You in Hell. The first one is this mantra that Carnegie and Henry Clay
It's filled.
They said, cut the prices, scoop the market, watch the costs, take care of themselves. And this autobiography does not go into nearly the rise from humble beginnings was obviously intriguing to him in Carnegie. His signal was another of the fellow, quote, fittest, and those were the individuals with whom Carnegie sought to align himself. And then two more highlights about this I can't repeat it enough. It is so important to understand. I think this is the one common advantage, whether it's Sam Walton, John D. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Frick, Henry Ford, the managers of all the Berkshire businesses, they are obsessed with keeping their costs low. Here's the first highlight. Carnegie would repeat the mantra time and time again. Profits and prices were cyclical, subject to any number of transient forces on the marketplace. Costs, however, would be strictly controlled, and in Carnegie's view, any savings achieved in the cost of goods were permanent. Second highest issue, the two men were of one mind. Frick had his way in Coke, that's the business that Frick monopolized, and that Carnegie winds up buying and folding into his steel empire. So it says Frick had made his way in Coke by the same reckoning that Carnegie had in rail and steel. If you knew your cost down to the penny, you were always on firm ground. And then one more thing to the autobiography of Andrew Carnegie, just unbelievable the amount of financial success that Andrew
really
had.
gotta
He sells his company.
keep an eye out on all this shit too.
For $480 million, JP Morgan combines that with U.S. Steel and it becomes the world's first billion-dollar corporation. Okay, so Carnegie starts the book talking about his parents' childhood, but then the first thing he says, one of the first things he says, why he decided to write an autobiography. I love how all this connects together. So he is going to tell us that how the autobiography of Judge Mellon, so he calls him Judge Mellon, that is Thomas Mellon. Thomas Mellon of the Mellon family.
I'm gonna put my hands on my hands
three
right there.
books on Mellon and his sons. I just haven't got around to
Way too close. See, I
but
can't
they're one
help
of the
it.
most important family dynasties in American business history. And so Carnegie's saying, hey, I enjoyed Judge Mellon's autobiography so much, it made me realize that I should write my own, and then I'm going to tell you how all this ties together. It's fantastic. And so Carnegie says, a book of this kind, written years ago, he means an autobiography, a book of this kind, written years ago by my friend Judge, gave me so much pleasure. The story which the judge told has proved a source of infinite satisfaction to his friends and must continue to influence succeeding generations of his family to live well. In like manner, I intend to tell my story. And I thought that was really interesting because when I reread that, I thought of what Mellon said. So Carnegie is influenced by Mellon. Mellon, in turn, was influenced by the autobiography of Ben Franklin. This is a quote, a highlight I have from the biography of Benjamin Franklin, written by Walter Isaacson, and it said Thomas Mellon erected a statue of Franklin in his bank's headquarters. He declared that Franklin had inspired him to leave his family farm and go into business. And this is what Mellon said. This is the exact person that Carnegie had just read the autobiography of. I regard the reading of Franklin's autobiography as a turning point in my life. Here was Franklin, poorer than myself, who by industry, thrift, and frugality had become learned and wise and elevated to wealth and fame. I read the book again and again and wondered if I might not do something in the same line by similar means. And so the reason I'm glad that Carnegie put that in the beginning of the book, because this book is only 330 pages. It is actually incredibly difficult to read. It's not, to me, it's not 330 pages. It's like double that because you have to, at least I had to, reread many pages twice to actually understand what he said. But it also jumps around a lot. So I would think of what you and I are going to go over today as more of like random thoughts and ideas that he found valuable throughout his life. And the first of those ideas that I think is really valuable is default optimism as a grand rule for life. And he says, I think my optimistic nature, my ability to shed trouble and to laugh through life must have been inherited from my grandfather, whose name I'm proud to bear. A sunny disposition is worth more than fortune. Young people should know that it can be cultivated, and that the mind, like the body, can be moved from the shade into sunshine. Let us move it then. Laugh trouble away if possible, and one usually can. And then he goes right into another idea that I think is fantastic. You and I have talked about this. This is something we learned from Warren Buffett on episode 100. Is this idea of inner scorecard, that the most important judge of your life story is actually yourself. And so Carnegie turns that into a motto that he uses for his entire life. He calls it the judge within. The judge within sits in the Supreme Court and can never be cheated. Hence the grand rule of life. Your own reproach alone do fear. This motto, adopted early in my life, has meant more to me than all of the sermons I ever heard. And so I want to jump right into the life circumstances that motivated Carnegie to build wealth. And at this point in his life, he's a young boy living in Scotland, and a change in technology is actually going to send his family into poverty because they did not react. His father did not react fast enough. His father manufactured linen, but he did it by hand. And it says
says the change from hand loom weaving to steam loom weaving was disastrous to our family. My father did not recognize the impending
This is
revolution
this.
and was struggling under the old system.
What
His
was that
loom
actually?
sank
This is
greatly in
on.
value, and it became necessary for my
Should be
mother
right
to
here.
step
God damn
forward
it! What's
and
going
endeavor
on?
to repair the family fortune. So she opened a small
Oh
shop.
no!
I remembered that shortly after this, I began to learn what poverty meant, and this is his reaction to this. And then and there came the resolve that I would cure that when I got to be a man. This is an unbelievably important story to understand Andrew Carnegie and his approach to building his business. He was the opposite of his father. His father was run over.
Oh no!
by
What is going
technological
on?
revolutions.
Oh,
Andrew
okay.
Carnegie built his wealth as a result of responding to and being ahead of technological revolution.
This is bad. It's just in the test environment, so I can fix it, but
fantastic biography of Francis
I
Ford
fucked it
Coppola,
up.
and there's a fantastic line in that book that I think describes something that repeats throughout human history. It's like it says, you can always understand the son by the story of his father.
No.
The story of the father is embedded in the son. That is exactly true for Andrew Carnegie. In Coppola's case, he was
Same
fed
thing
with
with
like
mom.
his dad was frustrated, often unemployed. He hated anybody who was successful, and Francis took like his own father's family and
We switch.
directed into this like insane work ethic and drive to be successful. And so Carnegie, I think he's like 8, maybe 10 years old, maybe 11 years old at this point in the story. And
What's
he's
that?
realizing, oh wait a minute, if you don't take advantage of the increase in technology in your industry, you could be thrown into a life of abject poverty. So one of the main lessons that I learned, 3 or 4 years ago from this book, probably the main lesson, is my interpretation of how Andrew Carnegie built his business, and it's something I've
regression.
repeated dozens of times on the podcast. And it says, invest in technology. The
Maybe
savings
just
compound.
maybe I'm not great
It
at
gives you
this.
an advantage over slower moving.
Actually.
It can be the difference between a profit
Fucked
and
up
loss.
the,
We are very far away from.
Couldn't
what
tell you where
businesses
it's at.
that
We don't have
Carnegie
another
engaged
copy.
in before he finds the steel business, which is where he made all of his wealth. Right? He's a rich man before he in relative terms, a rich person before he starts working in steel, and then he becomes one of the richest people in the world. Right? And what was fascinating that he was an early adopter of this thing called the Bessemer process, right? And he's in America at the time. The Bessemer process is being developed in England. And the Bessemer process was actually refining steel from molten pig iron, right? So it was a process that made production of steel cheap and efficient, and resulted in the mass production of steel on a scale that had never been seen before. Think about what we learned with him before. His slow invention of the mass production of cars resulted in the production of the Model T on a level that that human history had never seen before, right? Carnegie was able to produce steel on a scale that was never seen before.
I'm able to produce
And so a number
software
of these points for later, we'll get into it. We're still in his early life. I just
on
thought
a
it really
level.
interesting how this all fits
And that's
together.
the guys I have
Then
to
talks about,
actually do this.
School, he says, school was a perfect delight to me, and if anything occurred which prevented my attendance, I was unhappy. This happened every now and then because my morning duty was to bring water from the well. So it made him and everybody in the family constantly having to help each other out. All of them are going to work. All of them are going to pool their resources. Even at a young age, I mentioned Carnegie's obsession with cost. He's
It's annoying.
I think like 13 years old. He's going to
If I go
every
big.
single dollar of expense of his family's. Almost like the family bookkeeper. So he says, I earned a reputation of being an awful laddie, even when he was in school. I developed a strain of argumentativeness and combativeness, which is always with me. So that's no surprise to you and I. Founders are much higher on the disagreeableness scale than people that are not founders. So he's talking about, hey, I had to get the well from water before school, and then I go to school. Again, maybe 10 years old at this time. Then at the end, after school, he has to help his mom. I had often the shop errands to run after school. But in looking back upon my life, I have the satisfaction of feeling that I became useful to my parents, even at the early age of 10. This is what I meant about an early introduction to business and bookkeeping. Soon after, the accounts of various people who dealt with the shop were entrusted to my keeping, so that I had become acquainted with business affairs even in childhood. And so then he talks about the first business that he starts, his first tiny business that he starts when he was a young kid in Scotland. The takeaway here is that hire people that know more than you and then study human nature. Later in life, Carnegie said his success came not from what he knew, but his fact that he could organize people that knew more than him and understand how each individual fit into his entire system and the overall objective of his businesses. In fact, there is a quote from Meet You in Hell that I forgot to read to you that I think describes his approach. It says, Carnegie's approach may seem ruthless, but the idea of treating the complex process of manufacturing like a giant machine with parts that must be constantly retooled seemed to him
And he did that with both man and machine. And so I'm going to read the section to you. I got to change some words here because this is some weird language. It's going to be hard to follow. But he says, my first business venture was securing my companion's services for a season as an employer. The compensation being that the young rabbits should be named after rabbits. You got to feed them. And so gathering food are actually foraging food, actually. He finds a way to outsource to other kids with no
Yo.